today we are going to move into Unit 3.2. And let me tell you why Unit 3.2 is so important. One of the biggest roles we play in a transaction when we are dealing with people, whether we're dealing with our clients or we're dealing with customers, it really doesn't matter which one we're dealing with, but whichever one we're dealing with, one of the most important things that's always going to come up, and I think Seth will echo this and say, this is the thing that's going to bite you in the butt in the real world as an agent if you don't get it right, is disclosure.
Oh, yeah.
What information do we disclose when and to whom? So disclosure just means spilling the tea. That's all it means. It means being the source of information. And in our line of work, information is money, folks. Because if you share the wrong information with the wrong people, could you cost your clients money? What do y'all think? If you share the wrong information with the wrong person, could you end up costing money to your client?
Yeah. Not only could you do that, you could be costing yourself a lawsuit.
Absolutely. There you go. You could be getting sued by a member of the public because you didn't disclose information that was required of you. Now, we've already talked about disclosure. Sometimes people will come along and say, well, we've already talked about disclosure. We've already done this because it's part of old car.
Right.
And that's true. The D in old car, what does it stand for, folks? Disclosure. And when we talked about disclosure in old car, what information did we say we would disclose to our clients when we talked about the D in old car?
Everything.
Everything we know.
Yes.
Everything and anything we know that has any relationship at all to the transaction or anybody involved in the transaction. I mean, if you know the most scandalous thing in the world, if you represent a buyer and you know that the listing agent and one of the sellers are having an affair, do you disclose that to your buyer client?
Yes.
Because the D,
no problem with that.
The D, I mean, that is some steaming hot tea right there, right? You know, and you're just going to spill it all over the place, you know? Because
that seems pretty simple, don't it?
It's very simple when you're talking about disclosure to clients. When it comes to our clients, tell them what?
Everything. Test question, right?
So that is a test question for sure. And that's why you always got to know, am I talking about a client or am I talking about a customer? Hopefully you're going to start to see that very early in this class. That every time you read a test question, you got to ask yourself, am I talking about a client or am I talking about a customer? Because the rules are very different. See, here's the thing. Old car only applies when we're dealing with who? Client. Someone who has hired us to represent them in that specific transaction. The reality is that the law requires other disclosures. Disclosures not to our clients. Now, the law does require disclosure to our clients, and that one's the easy one. So I'm just going to label it here real quick. What does the law require us to disclose to our clients? Remind me one more time.
Everything.
Right?
Yeah.
Everything.
Yes.
I mean, and so if you need like an auditory reminder, this is like the best auditory reminder, especially if you're like my age range.
What do we get for $10? Everything you want. Everything.
See, that's like, and you're not getting any more of that song. Those of you, if you know, you know, you're not getting any more of that one. But here's the thing. What do our clients get for their $10? Everything they want, right? As far as disclosure goes, everything. But when we start to disclose things to others, who are not our clients. And what do we refer to those people as?
Customers.
Customers. That list becomes much more limited. It would be easy if we just said, you don't have to disclose anything to a customer, but the state does not let us be that cutthroat. We're not allowed to be cutthroat like that. We're not allowed to say, you ain't my client, I ain't telling you nothing. And so that makes our job hard. It makes our job difficult. Seth, what would you say is the hardest part of any transaction? Figuring out what you can and cannot say, right?
Yeah.
100%.
It is. It's by far. Because what would your client prefer you say to people that they're working against in the transaction? If your client had a choice, what would you say to those customers that you don't represent?
Absolutely nothing.
Nothing.
Not
You wouldn't tell them anything. You wouldn't disclose any information to them. But we can't do that because there are going to be some limited disclosures that are going to be required. Does that make sense for everybody, kind of where we're headed here today?
Yes.
Now, that's only a second type of disclosure we have to think about. There's yet a third type of disclosure, which is actually the first one we're going to start with today, which is disclosure from sellers to buyers. That's a whole different ball game in and of itself, because that does not involve who. When I say disclosure happening from the seller to the buyer, who is not involved in that disclosure?
The agent.
The agents. Whether the agents represent the seller or the agents represent the buyer, the agents have nothing to do with disclosure from seller to buyer. Who are the only people involved in that?
the
Seller and the
buyers.
buyers.
So there's one set of disclosure laws for agents disclosing things to their clients, and that's the everything that we already talked about. There's one set of disclosure laws for agents disclosing things to customers, which we're going to talk about today. And then there's one that a whole other set of disclosure laws for sellers disclosing to buyers. How many of y'all feel like this is going to have to be something you have to study several times so that you know which set of rules to apply in this particular situation?
Yes.
Right? Because it's not just as simple as saying disclosure. You got to say, okay,
No.
what's the situation? Who's disclosing? What are they disclosing? You know?
Right. And who are we disclosing it to?
And who are we disclosing it to?
I don't want what you said to go in one ear and out the other, Travis, because you said it's a very different story, the amount of information we disclose to a client, which is everything, and then the limited amount that we disclose to a customer, because we are legally obligated to tell this customer some stuff that might even be harmful to our client.
Right.
So
That's exactly right.
client or customer, who am I talking to?
That's exactly right. His emphasis is on point, so on point. So let's start with this morning, the one that does not involve us. In fact, I want you to write that on your notes right here. Not us. Because if we are an agent in the transaction, folks, we are not the buyer and we are not the seller. Does that make sense for everybody?
Yes.
We've been hired to represent the buyer, or we've been hired to represent the seller, but that doesn't make me the buyer. That doesn't make me the seller. And the rules that we're about to talk about right now are the rules that apply to the seller and the buyer only. Is everybody with me on that?
Yes.
Okay? These are the rules that apply to the seller and the buyer only. Now, it's interesting when you start to talk about rules that apply to the seller and the buyer only. Because when you talk about that, there's this part of the law called caveat emptor, which literally means empty promise. If you're translating literally, it means empty promise. The law in the state of North Carolina is based on the fact that sellers are giving the buyer an empty promise. I'm going to say that again because it sounds super shitty, and it is. The law in the state of North Carolina when it comes to a real estate transaction is that the sellers are giving the buyer an empty promise. In other words, what do you think the state is going to require the seller to disclose to a buyer? When we say the seller is required to give an empty promise, what do you think the seller is required by law to disclose to the buyer in that transaction?
Material fact.
Nothing.
Absolutely nothing.
I heard heard somebody say something that I don't even think we covered yet, which is fine because you might be a repeat, but somebody said material facts.
Well, and we haven't talked about material facts because material facts don't apply to sellers and they don't apply to
Right.
buyers, right? That's a us word. We're going to get to them, but I'm not there yet. And sellers certainly are not responsible for material facts. So I'm going to say it
They're not a
again. I'm going to
licensee.
ask it again because I want y'all to be clear on this. Under the law in North Carolina, what is a seller required to inform the buyer of legally?
Anything.
Nothing.
Not a
Nothing.
dang thing.
Nothing.
Nothing.
No thing.
Zero.
Yeah.
Now, compare that with what we are required legally to disclose to our clients in a transaction in North Carolina.
Everything.
Everything.
Everything. And what are sellers required to disclose to buyers?
Nothing.
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 Good job.
Now, let me just point something out to y'all. Did buying a for sale by owner house just become a lot more dangerous in your mind now that you know that a seller in this state is required to disclose absolutely nothing? Here's the thing. I'm going to throw this out. There's a question because I think sometimes this does not really settle into your brain. Could the seller know with absolute certainty that the house is infested with termites who are eating up all the lead-based paint and shitting out toxic radon gas and not say a word to buyers about that property in North Carolina legally?
Yes.
Yes. There is nothing legally wrong with that in the state of North. You can get on a trip and say, oh, that's morally wrong and that's ethically wrong, and that's up for debate. But what ain't up for debate is legally. Legally, that is entirely allowed in the state of North Carolina because of this idea that the seller is giving an empty promise. Are we all good on that?
Yes.
Okay? Because again, we're not here to talk about ethics and morals. We're here to talk about the law, the law, the law.
Right.
And that's the law. So it seems like this should be a very short section. How many of y'all feel like, okay, well, I got that. They don't have to tell them anything. How many of y'all feel like you got that covered now? Sellers don't have to tell
Sellers.
buyers anything, right?
No more to it.
There is more to it. There is more to it because the state likes to be confusing. The state of North Carolina, and listen, this is my home state, and I love this state. But the state of North Carolina likes to act like they're doing something even when they ain't doing nothing. We all about the show, right? The state of North Carolina, and see, this is why I'm a North Carolinian. How many of you, if you got somebody coming over to your house, even for 5 minutes, you will spend 3 hours and your house will be more clean for that 5-minute visit than it has been for the last 6 months that you lived in there, right?
Yes.
Because you want them to think you live like that all the time. That is the state of North Carolina, folks. That's how they operate. They want it to look like they care. And so they have published this form called the North Carolina Residential Property and Owners Association Disclosure Statement. Fancy sounding. And look at what it says about the form. And this is going to be heavily tested on the North Carolina section. By the way, I try to give you a hint when I think something's going to be on the North Carolina section. I don't know if any of you have picked up on it or not. Do you notice there's a little hint here when something's going to be tested heavily on the North Carolina section of the test? I mean,
Yes.
hint, hint, nod, nod, wink, wink. When you see the North Carolina flag on a slide, that means it's very state specific. It would only be tested in the state section. This is a North Carolina form. And look at what it says. It says it's a mandatory, oops, I'm sorry, back up. It says it's a mandatory disclosure form. Does that sound like I'm talking out of both sides of my face when I go from one screen that says the seller doesn't have to disclose anything and I go to the next screen where I said the seller has to fill out a mandatory disclosure form? Those don't sound like they could be true at the same time, do they?
Correct.
No.
They can be. And here's the reason they can be. Sellers have the right in North Carolina. How many of you ever heard of somebody pleading the fifth? You ever heard of somebody being, they called to testify in court, and I'm going to invoke my Fifth Amendment right not to say anything. And why do people plead the fifth? Let's be honest. Because they know anything they say probably ain't good, right? And they don't want to implicate themselves. Sellers are allowed to plead the fifth on this form. Sellers are allowed for any of the questions on this form that they choose, or all of the questions, to check no representation. Now, does that mean all sellers will check no representation? Absolutely not. Are some sellers going to choose to answer the questions as truthfully as they possibly can?
Yes.
Yeah.
Some might, yeah.
Maybe, yeah.
Are some sellers going to choose to lie on the form?
Absolutely.
Yes.
Of course they will. And are some going to choose to say, you know what, I'm just not telling you anything because I don't have to?
Yeah.
Yes. And how does a seller legally say, I'm not telling you anything because I don't have to?
No
No
representation.
representation.
No representation. Here's the thing. What's not legal for a seller is to blow the form off. What's not legal for a seller is to say, I'm not going to fill that form out because I don't have to disclose anything. So if you're asked on the test, is a seller required to fill out the form? What's your answer going to be?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Most sellers, and we're going to talk about that, are required to fill out the form.
Now, I want to ask, is there anybody who's in their right mind thinking, well, if they don't have to disclose anything, but they have to fill out the form, what the heck is the purpose of the form?
Yes.
I've been asking myself that for 20 years in this business.
It's so dumb.
It's the
It's-
Just
biggest.
kidding, just kidding.
It's the
It's the
state of
biggest-
North Carolina.
It's the biggest waste of energy on the planet. It really is. It's so. It's
Don't ask
such,
us why.
it's such a joke, but they're going to test you on it. Rebecca, you
We
had
don't
your
even put
hand up.
any
Did we get your
emphasis
question,
on it.
Rebecca?
I just wanted to know, because it says most sellers of most residential properties, is that going to be important? You did just mention that we're going to go over that.
We are.
Oh, okay.
Yes. You're so timely, Rebecca. Look at you. You know, it's like
Thank
I
you.
want to ask a quick question Timothy
Sure.
asked, because I just answered it and I want to make sure I'm right. He said, are there consequences for lying on the form? And I said, of course.
yes. See, let me be clear. Caveat emptor does not include the right to lie. Caveat emptor is the right to not say. Lying is fraud. So sellers should be careful about lying on the form because, and Natalie's on top of it in the chat, Natalie said they could be sued, and they can be. If a buyer can prove that the seller lied on the form, knew and lied, then they might have grounds for a lawsuit. But again, none of this involves us because this is the law for disclosure between what two parties?
Seller and
Seller and
buyer.
Buyer and
buyer.
buyer. We don't have a thing to do with it. We just need to know the law so that we can explain it to the seller. Here's our function. Seller, here's the form. You have to do what with it?
Let out.
Fill it out to the best of your ability. Alexia, did you have a question?
I did actually. It kind of ties into yesterday, adding this on. So you said that the mandatory disclosure has to be given to the buyer before the offer is placed.
Well, I didn't say that yet, but I'm going to say it. You're reading my
Okay.
mind. I haven't gotten there yet, but we're
Okay,
going to say it.
so-
Yeah.
I guess my question is, say I want to put an offer and I tell my agent I want to put an offer and they tell,
So you're a buyer. I just want to be clear. You're a buyer.
Yes, I'm the buyer and they're telling the seller's agent that I want to put in an offer. Do they then go ahead and send me that before I put the offer?
They should. They should. Absolutely. Because the idea is, when's the appropriate time to give you as a buyer information, any information that
Before
you
you
need
make
to
an
know before you make an offer?
Yeah. Well, and this market is so crazy because last year my husband and I bought a house sight unseen.
Yep. All the more reason to be told before you make an offer, right?
And so I don't recall ever seeing that paper, but I'm sure I did.
Well, maybe you did and maybe you didn't. Remember, people don't always follow the law. Well, we're here to
True.
teach the law, and that doesn't mean people always follow it.
Okay.
Okay. Amy?
Okay. So I just want to add this also because it's gonna, help me remember this. So specifically talking about that form, my in-laws just recently looked at a house that they were going to put an offer in on, and just so you're aware, the house was a complete fixer-upper. It was gutted on the inside, nothing like the pictures. They went to put in an offer because they kind of wanted a fixer-upper. But then I was looking at the contract that they sent before the offer, and that form was there, and they did choose that they were not going to, give any information at all. And I was like, wow. So now I understand why they didn't do that.
There you go. There you go. And to Rebecca's question earlier, because Rebecca asked a great question, notice it said most sellers, right? Most
Right.
residential sellers are required to fill out the form. Well, let me point out the word residential to you first, because sometimes it's easy to breeze past that. First of all, what's the most obvious properties that are exempt from this law? What sellers don't have to follow this law?
Non-residential.
Commercial.
Anything not residential, commercial, vacant land, farmland, anything that's not residential. So first of all, this only applies to land on which resides a residence. Does that make sense for everybody?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay?
Yes.
So that's the first. The reason it's not all sellers, it's most sellers, is that it's only residential. Everybody good with that?
Yep.
Okay. So would somebody who was selling like farmland in Edgecombe County need to fill this out as a seller?
No.
No, doesn't apply. Even then, even if it's residential, there are 3 very narrow exemptions to this law, even when it's residential. The first is if the property is being sold at a foreclosure auction. I want you to add the word auction here. So if you're going to the county courthouse, foreclosure auctions only happen at the county courthouse. Okay. If you're going to a foreclosure auction at the county courthouse, you should not expect to see a disclosure statement from a seller. And here's why. It makes logical sense. Because the seller ain't participating in that sale.
Right.
Somebody is forcing the sale. Does that make sense for everybody? It's kind of hard to make the seller fill out a form when you just kicked them out so that you could sell the place out from under them. Okay. So if you're buying a property at a foreclosure auction as a buyer, you should not expect to see the residential property disclosure statement.
Natalie asked, is it fair to look like this form like Carfax before you buy
Natalie,
a car?
I do not think that's a fair comparison at all. I love the question. Here's the
I do
thing.
too.
Carfax is not the seller. Carfax is a third party that's gathering information and informing you about the information about the car. This is like buying a car without a Carfax and asking who what they know about the car.
The seller.
The person
seller.
selling you the car, right? It's asking the person selling you the car about, and they're going to probably look at you and go, oh, I don't know, no problem with it. Same idea, okay?
Right.
Now, foreclosure auctions are exempt. New construction is exempt. Why do you think new construction would probably be exempt from a law where the seller can choose whether or not they disclose information about the property? Who's the seller in new construction? Let's be clear.
The
The
builder.
builder is.
Builder.
Folks, it's new. There shouldn't be any issues with it.
Shouldn't have any issues. Yeah.
It's under warranty by law in North Carolina for a year. You won't be tested on that, but FYI, state law in North Carolina is a 1-year warranty on new construction residential build. Just so you know. So there's no issues to disclose if it's new construction. So does that exemption make sense? Why this law does not apply to that situation? Everybody good with that?
Yeah.
Okay. And then the third one is if the property is being sold by an estate or a trust after the owner has died. Why do you think those properties are exempt?
They can't fill out the
Nobody will
form.
sign the form.
For them to fill the form out when they dead. The person who would know is dead. The person who has stepped in and is trying to sell the property doesn't know anything about the property. Does that make sense for everybody? Okay. So now, hopefully that answers your question, Rebecca, about the difference between all and most. Are we good with that? Okay. But even still with these exemptions, is this going to cover most residential properties in the state of North Carolina? What do y'all think?
Yes.
Yes. The vast majority of residential properties are going to fall under this law. What that means is that the vast majority of residential sellers are going to have to fill out this form one way or the other if they want to follow the law. Now, what do they do with the form once they fill it out? What's the whole purpose of the form? For the seller to give it to who?
The buyer.
The buyer. And is it Alexa or Alexia? Am I supposed to pronounce the I?
Alexia.
Alexia. Okay. I just wanted to make sure I had it right. As Alexia said, it would only make sense to get this for the buyer as far as timing goes, right? As far as timing goes, that they get it before they make what to try to purchase the property?
Offer.
An offer. I mean, as a buyer, shouldn't you? Because when you make an offer, remember the idea of an offer is you're willing to be committed. You're saying, I will pay this amount of money for this property. I will close on this date. If you just sign right here, we'll be under contract. It's not fair to ask a buyer to commit to that before they have the information. Does that make sense for everybody?
Yes.
Yes.
And so the idea here is if the seller is going to come clean, they need to do it before the buyer makes an offer. Everybody good with that?
Yes.
Okay. So even if the buyer gets one that just says no representation, no representation, no representation, the law still says, I've had people say, well, there's no need to give it to the buyer because the seller checked no representation. Well, that might be true from a practical standpoint, but that's not true from a legal standpoint. Is it still the law that the buyer must receive this thing from the seller in most residential transactions before that buyer presents an offer on that property?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Even if it's garbage and has no information on it, the law says they have to get it. Everybody with me on that? Okay. Good.
Travis,
Yes. Go ahead, Jordan.
would you say something like, before you make an offer on this house, I need to let you know there's a form that needs to be, that you need to be given? Or was that
Yes. So here, are you asking like how I would present it to the buyer?
Yes.
Yeah. Now,
In the
as a,
conversation.
are you asking how I would present it if I were the seller, or how I present it to them as an agent?
As an
handing
agent.
it? So as an agent, here's what I say. The seller has provided this disclosure form for you. I have no idea if anything on here is wrong or if anything on here is accurate. This is the seller's disclosure statement that they are required to fill out by law. So take it for whatever it's worth. That's how I present it to a buyer.
Okay.
Because that's really what it is. It's just whatever the seller's willing to say on that piece of paper. Everybody okay?
Mhm.
Okay. Now, look
Is
at this.
calendar days, Travis. Somebody just asked me.
Is this calendar days? Yes. Anytime in this class, anytime. I'm going to go ahead and tell you because people try to make this so much tougher than it is and try to remember, oh, my calendar days or business days or banking days or what kind of days or. But there's only two kind of days in this class. Calendar days, which include weekends, holidays, every day of the year is a calendar day. Okay. And then banking days. So we have calendar days and we have banking days. And people tend to get tripped up because some rules will say, you know, you got to do it a certain number of calendar days before something or a certain number of banking days before something. You want an easy way to remember which one it's going to be with that applies to every rule across the board, folks?
Yep.
Yes.
If it deals with handing over money, it's going to be banking days. If it deals with anything else, like giving information, it's going to be calendar days. Okay. Anytime we're giving information, we're giving disclosures, we're giving offers, that's all going to be calendar days. When it comes to depositing money in a bank, it's banking days. Why do you think we have to do banking days? Because if we did calendar days, couldn't we get in trouble real fast if it's like like this weekend coming up is a holiday weekend, right?
Mm-hmm.
You know, so when you're handling money, we count banking days. Everything else is going to be calendar days. I want you to focus on this last bullet point right here for just a second. Because some of you are going to get yourself in trouble right here when you get in the real world, and you're going to get yourself in trouble on the test. Let me ask you a question. Between friends, because we're friends now. What do you think is the best answer to these questions from a seller's perspective if they want to give themselves the least amount of liability and the most amount of protection? What do you think? What do you personally think is the best answer to the questions if the seller doesn't want to take on any extra?
Yeah, no representation.
Okay, does it matter what we think?
No representation. I'm just asking what your personal opinion is. No representation.
No representation.
Yes.
Here's the thing. Don't give that advice. Whose disclosure form is this, folks?
The
Sellers.
The seller's. If you give them advice, you're actually answering the form for them.
Right.
If
We
you
should have
tell
no
them,
attachment.
if I was you, I check no representation, that's the same thing as you answering the form. And who's not supposed to be answering this form?
Agents.
Brokers.
The agent, the broker. Does that make
No,
sense?
and Natalie, I think you're on a right track, but we also do help clients with legal forms. So just because it's a legal form doesn't mean we can't help. It's just, this is literally the seller's
To Seth's
disclosure.
point, there will be times we will give some advice on legal forms, on paperwork, like offers and contracts.
And this is why our agents are like the top of the game in
Yeah.
the business, because we nitpick stuff.
We
and
do.
Y'all aren't going to get it wrong.
Right.
So.
And look, I love Stephanie's comment there. Stephanie said, we can explain what each answer means. I love it. I love it. I'm actually going to go forward and show you what I mean. I love that, Stephanie. This is what the form looks like. And I know it's small on your screen, but I just want to show you what Stephanie's talking about, and she's exactly right. Like, look at number 8. Number 8 says, is there any problem, malfunction, or defect with the dwelling's plumbing system? Well, the seller may say to you, especially if you're their agent, what does this mean? You can answer that question. You can say, maybe you got the dumbest seller in the world and they don't know what plumbing means, right?
Yeah.
You can say, well, plumbing means your pipes. Do you have leaks? Do you have other issues with water that you're concerned about? That's what they're asking you. It's the, well, what should I answer questions that we can't answer. Does that make sense for everybody?
Right,
Yes.
right,
Yes.
right.
We can explain the meaning of the question, but we can't say, and if I was you, I would answer this, or I suggest
Right.
you answer this, or I think you should answer that.
Well,
That's advice. On this
and
form, we're not
Natalie-
allowed to give advice, even if they're our client.
And Natalie asked, what if the seller asked, what does no representation mean? So I actually threw the form in the chat, which I don't think it's required of them to read it, Travis, but it is very interesting. If you
It
want to
is.
take a minute.
Yeah.
And it tells you on bullet point number 2 on the first page what each of them mean, but I think you can answer that. Is all
You
I'm trying to
can,
say.
you can answer, what does no representation mean? No representation, here would be the answer I would give to any seller, because I get this question often. What does no representation mean? No representation simply means I'm choosing not to answer. I'm not answering yes, and I'm not answering no. You could answer no representation because you don't know the answer, or you could answer no representation because you do know the answer and you'd rather not answer. But no representation simply means no answer.
Right.
That's, to me, that's the easiest way to explain no representation.
So, and Amber had asked, is it an issue because it's legal advice? Yes, on this form, but we are expected to give advice to our clients.
Right. And
So-
generally speaking, and so that's where the art of real estate becomes tough, is knowing where the advice has to stop. And on this form, the advice is 0, no advice.
Yes.
We can
Yes, yes,
explain
yes.
and we can give meanings and definitions to things, but we cannot give advice about how it should be completed. Everybody good
Which
with
this
that?
should be like music to our ears. Like, we don't have to worry about this. Oh my gosh.
This is the one thing we don't have to worry about,
Duty.
because this
but-
only applies to the sellers and buyers. Everybody good with that?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay. Now I'm going to back up a slide for just a second, make sure we've rounded this out. It is required by law that the seller provide it before the buyer makes an offer. Now, just because it's required by law, remember, people don't always follow the law. Do people speed sometimes?
Yes.
Yes.
And is there a potential penalty for speeding?
Potentially.
Yes.
Sure. If you are caught and you are ticketed, you could have to pay a fine. You could lose driving privileges. You could have points on your license and have your insurance go up. Those are all potential penalties, right?
Yep.
For speeding.
Don't
Well,
do
this law also has a potential penalty, and that is death. No, I'm kidding. It's not.
Oh my
that
God.
serious. It's not that serious.
Oh, God.
We're awake.
I believe it for a second. I was
It is no.
not expecting that.
Actually, not quite that serious. So I want you to put in your notes, penalty. This is the penalty right here. And who do you think is going to be penalized? Is it the buyer or the seller?
The seller.
The seller.
It's the seller who hasn't done what they're
seller.
supposed to do. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yes.
Right? And so it's the seller that's going to be penalized. It
So
says
just listen.
if the buyer doesn't get the form prior to making an offer,
Okay.
they can still make their offer. Nobody's going to stop the buyer from making their offer. And the seller can still accept their offer. So generally speaking, when an offer is accepted, aren't we under contract?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Right? Don't the parties have to do what they promised they were going to do?
Yes.
So let's say the contract says the buyer is going to give the seller $25,000 as soon as we go under contract. Does the buyer now owe the seller $25,000 the minute we go under contract? In most cases.
Yes.
Yes. Here's the penalty. If the seller did not deliver this thing before that buyer made that offer, and the seller accepts this offer, the buyer gets 3 days for free to change their mind, rip the contract up, back out with no penalty whatsoever. I'm going to say that again.
Yes.
The penalty here is that the seller is essentially going to be required to give the buyer 3 days after the contract is formed and agreed to, where the buyer can just back out and tell him to shove this house up your ass. I don't want it. And I'm not paying you anything. That's a pretty big penalty, is it not, folks?
Yes.
Absolutely.
So is it in the seller's best interest to make sure the buyer sees this thing before they make that offer?
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well,
Jessica,
whose best interest is it in to not receive it?
the buyer.
The buyer.
I'm the buyer. You know, if I'm the buyer, I'm like, I don't want it. No.
Right.
Because if I'm the
So-
buyer, let's be honest. If you're the buyer, what would you rather have? A form where the seller might or might not tell you anything, or 3 days to back out and not cost you a single penny?
Let's get those 3 days rolling.
3 days.
I'd rather have 3 days.
So just from a practical point, I mean, if you're the seller's, the listing agent, you've been hired by the seller, yes, you want to get that in front of buyers like ASAP. But if the buyer's agent, and this is just a quick little practical note, if the buyer's agent is like in the MLS or in their open house or whatever, and they don't see it, the best thing you can do is just shut
Right.
up.
I'm not hunting you down for this thing. Because as a
No,
buyer,
this is on you.
I'd rather have the 3 days.
Right.
Jessica, you had your hand up.
Yeah, so my question is just because I know things can work very fast or quickly. So let's say like we just bought a house and it was pretty quick. As soon as I saw it, I said, all right, we're ready. And we want to put an offer in. How does that work, I guess, on the other side? Because I don't think I saw the form either, which is no big deal. But I guess to make sure if I was the selling agent, like, do agents communicate like, hey, I think my client's going to put in an offer, and then be like, here.
Yes, absolutely. That's exactly.
So they do
Here's the
communicate
thing.
prior to
If
putting in
you
that offer?
now, because I'm gonna distill your question down to what I think you're asking, Jessica, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think this is what you're asking. What's going to be the agent's role in this thing? Since we're not involved in filling the form out, or it's not for us, what's going to be our role? And Seth largely was just talking about this very thing. If you're representing the seller, your role is going to be to make sure every buyer gets the form before
Throwing
they
it out
make
like
an offer.
Oprah.
Because think about how stupid you'd feel as an agent if you went over there and put the under contract sign in the ground, and then you had to go take it down 2 days later because you did not make sure the buyer got this form before they made an offer. You'd feel pretty dumb, wouldn't you?
Right.
Right. And so as a listing agent, somebody who's been hired by a seller, as soon as I start to get any hint whatsoever that a buyer has interest or that they might send an offer, we're sending this form out. We're firing it out. As a matter of fact, in my listings, I actually have it available on the kitchen counter. I have it uploaded. I have it uploaded to the MLS. I have, as soon as some buyer or some buyer's agent emails me and says, hey, we just took a look at your property. We're kind of thinking about an offer. Here's a disclosure.
Right.
I mean,
it's not like there's anything super confidential on there. It's just a disclosure.
Right.
Yeah, I was just wanting to make sure that they got it ahead of time. I wasn't sure if maybe they just said, oh, here it is. And then you missed your window of oh shit, I didn't give this to them before they put in an offer.
And if you did miss your window, there's the penalty, right? The penalty's right there, and it's clear. If you miss the window and they put the offer, so if the offer comes, as a matter of fact, what you're going to see when we get later in the class and we start to look at popular contracts that are used in North Carolina, there's actually a section in there that the buyer will check one of two options. It says either I have seen the residential property disclosure statement before I make this offer, or I have not seen the residential property association disclosure statement before making this offer. And if they check that box that says they have not seen it, everybody in the world is going to know, okay, look at the date on that contract. And for 3 days, it ain't worth the paper it's written on.
Now, Travis, somebody actually just private messaged me and asked if they receive it, they're already under contract, they haven't received it before an offer, and then they receive it the next day. Does that 3 days period stop? Or
Nope.
Cool deal.
It does not. It's still 3 days after the contract is formed. How we all feel?
Danielle has a question.
What's up,
Or
Danielle?
something to add.
So I was wondering, like, if you had an open house, would it be acceptable to have these forms out since there's not confidential information? Is it acceptable to have these forms out and like, hey, boom, 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 and then your offers can come in and you can just accept?
That's exactly right.
Just throw it like confetti.
That's exactly right. I mean, we put it, I know Seth and I and Leslie and my mom, the folks in our office, we have it everywhere, not just one place. We have it at open houses. We have it on the counter when you have a showing. We have it uploaded in the MLS. We email it to you separately when you start asking us questions about the property, because we want to make sure there's no way a buyer could possibly say, I didn't get this.
Right. On top of fulfilling that duty as us as an agent, it also just makes you look good as an agent. So
Exactly. How do we all feel about this form? Everybody okay with the structure and the way it works? Because you're going to see this for sure on the state specific section of the test. No doubt about it.
I have a question.
Okay, go ahead, Morgan.
I'm sorry. So with that, so buyers can present this form to the seller? Like, you need to fill this out to give to me?
Well, they could, but here would be my question, Morgan. Why? As a buyer, I would much prefer, because here's the thing. You're giving the seller a form where the seller could literally just go, all right, filled it out. You happy now?
Sure. Okay.
Which would you rather have as the buyer? Would you rather have that handed back to you, or would you rather have 3 days to get out of this contract you're about to sign?
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah, we just said that. Okay. Sorry.
So could the buyer seek it out? Sure. Why would they? I have no idea.
Okay.
Here's by the way, this has absolutely nothing to do with the test, but here's my favorite way for a seller to fill out the disclosure statement. No, there's no problem with the foundation. Nope, there's no leaks. Nope, there's no water seepage. No, there's no problems with the electrical system. Is there any problem with the plumbing? No representation. No. Come on.
I know. It's some of them might not know.
I mean, come on. If you sat there and read every single question and you answered them all no, and you put no representation, that's a yes.
Yeah.
FYI, translation. That's a yes.
And somebody also just asked too, and I'm just going to clarify this in the quickest way possible. So the buyer does not receive it before making an offer. It's from the point that the contract is formed that they can terminate for 3 days.
Right. Not the point they made their offer, but the point the seller actually accepts their offer and says, congratulations, we're under contract. Start a 3-day clock.
And after those 3 days, they still owe the form, but the buyer just no longer has any
the ability to get
back out.
That's exactly right. There's no penalty anymore. I forgot what Miss Brito's first name was. She keeps not changing that, but I
think
Christina.
Christina. There we go. Sorry, Christina.
Okay. I just wanted to comment on what you said that you don't know why a buyer would be like asking for it. That was me. Like, I saw several houses before picking my house, and I was asking for that paper first. Like, that was some type of, I don't know, for me to know about the house. And then the house that I ended up buying, which is this one, it had no representation, like a whole line.
Yeah.
Because it was like an investment. Like they, and I was like, I was just like hunting for this freaking disclosure. And then I just picked the one that had like a whole line, no representation.
Yeah. So it was useless. It turned out to be useless, right? Yeah.
Yes.
Shanar, you're muted. There you go.
My question is, so if the agent delivered this to the buyer in time, and when the buyer fill out the contract, buyer can say, like, check, I haven't seen the form, but you delivered it before. How do you deal with that?
You send it in a way that you have proof. You email it, you send it, or you send them an email back when you receive that offer and say, yes, you did. I gave it to you. Here it is again. Please change this.
So you have to have a trace of email and written and everything.
I mean, that's just smart in any setting. Absolutely.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Janet? You muted. Or no, you're good? You're good? I mean, okay.
I had a question, one quick question.
I
This is
missed you.
Erica. I'm sorry.
Oh, there you are. There you are. What's up, Erica?
Is there ever a time, I know you're not supposed to give advice on how to complete the form, but you should know the answers though, as the person's agent, as a seller's agent.
We're going to move to that. Just hold that thought and hold that question, because we're going to move into what we do. You are, well, Janet, it doesn't show you muted, but I could not hear you. So I don't know if you have the wrong microphone selected or something like that. But no, it doesn't show you muted. I just can't hear you. Okay. You can type it in the chat or send it to me personally if you want to. I'll read it out until you get it fixed. So I want you to take your phone out. Remember how the other day we did the little poll everywhere thing and you had all already joined it? So you should take your phone out, go back to your text messaging that you created the other day. You don't have to send the Travis Everett 302 again. You just go to that same text message thread that you created the other day in your phone. And you should be able to, hang on just a second. I got to activate it though. I got to activate it. You can't answer until I show you, until you see that ABCD. While I get logged in here, I'll go ahead and read the question to you though. A home buyer in North Carolina makes an offer on a resale townhome without seeing the residential property disclosure statement. Okay. From the sellers. 2 days after agreeing to purchase the property, the buyer decides to change their mind and back out. Let me get it activated here. I thought I already had it. I apologize. Activate. There we go. Now you can answer it. A, the buyer in such a situation cannot back out without a valid reason. B, the buyer can back out, but would likely be in breach of contract and have to forfeit any deposit they had paid. C, the listing agent should quickly fill out the form for the sellers and give it to the buyer. Or D, the buyer can back out without penalty and get a refund of any deposits or fees paid to go under contract. So go ahead and put your send your answer. And remember, all you got to type is A, B, C, or D and hit send. See where your brain is at on this thing. Okay, which one of these answers do you think is the correct answer in this situation where a home buyer makes an offer on a resale townhome without seeing the residential property disclosure statement from the sellers? So the first thing you got to ask yourself is, and I'll just talk about this while you're answering still, does the law apply? Would the law apply? Is a townhome residential? What do y'all think?
Yes.
Yeah, there you go. Janet, you're echoing again, so your microphone's working again. So yes, townhomes are residential, no doubt. Okay. So then we have to ask ourselves, is it any of the other exemptions? Did it say anything about it being new construction? Actually, it says resale, so it doesn't have that exemption. It doesn't say about it being sold by trust, and it doesn't say it's being sold at a foreclosure. It looks like to me the law applies. How many, y'all give me a thumbs up. How many of you think the law applies to this transaction? Yep, it does. It does. So then we go through the answer choices here. It says the buyer in such a situation cannot back out without a valid reason. Sure they can. Sure they can. Matter of fact, buyers can almost always back out, but in this case, they certainly can back out because they're within the what time frame?
3 days.
Within 3 days.
3 days.
They're within that 3 days that they get because they didn't get the form. B, the buyer can back out but would likely be in breach of contract and have to forfeit any deposit they paid. That's the whole penalty part. They aren't in breach. They get a free out for 3 days. C, the listing agent should quickly fill out the form for the sellers and give it to the buyer. Or D, the buyer can back out without penalty and get a refund of any deposits or fees paid to go under contract. I love D. D's the answer here, according to the law. And how could we have changed this answer from D to B by simply changing the situation? How would this answer be B instead of D? This is make sure you understand the actual law and the rule. What would make this answer be B instead of D?
Providing the disclosure.
If they got the form before they made their offer. Does everybody see how that would change the situation? Right? If the buyer got the form before they made their offer, the answer would be B.
Okay.
Okay?
Yep.
There you go. There you go. How?
I would have said without seeing. I just don't like without seeing, because I mean that could mean that they got it, but I guess I was reading too much into it. But I picked D anyway. But
Okay,
when I
good.
saw without seeing, that could mean that they got it, but they didn't.
You're right. I should change it to say without receiving. How about that?
Yeah, without receiving. Yeah.
All right, I can do that. I can do that. All right. Are we feeling pretty good about the residential property disclosure statement?
Yes.
Good. So let's do this. Let's take a quick break. I'm going to pause the recording. All right. So before we took our break, we had covered the second type of disclosure, which was disclosure from sellers to buyers in the transaction. And we mentioned that we've got one more big disclosure topic to cover. And I will tell you, maybe we saved the best for last, or maybe we saved the worst for last, depending on your perspective. We certainly saved the most difficult one for last, because disclosure from agent to client is very straightforward. Remind me again, agent to client, what are we disclosing?
Everything
we know.
Everything.
Disclosure from seller to buyer is pretty straightforward. The seller doesn't have to disclose anything. They just have to fill out a form, but they can still choose not to disclose stuff, right?
Yes.
Right.
Now we get to the one that is the toughest to deal with. It's the toughest to deal with in the real world. It's the toughest to deal with, I think, for licensees. It is certainly the most common reason that licensees are disciplined. There is no doubt about it that what we're about to talk about is the most common reason that the North Carolina Real Estate Commission will discipline brokers for failing to disclose things to customers. It is not going to be the one, disclosing to clients, even though that sometimes happens and you might see a disciplinary action. And it's usually not related to sellers disclosing things to buyers, but the disclosure issues that you see repetitively over and over and over, as far as a disciplinary problem where people either lose their license, get their license suspended, is failing to properly disclose to customers the proper information. So like, and I'll show you what I mean by that. I'm gonna share something with you real quickly as I talk. I'm gonna pull up the Real Estate Commission's website for you, because I want to show you something that is publicly available.
We're doing that this early.
We are. Ain't that something? Ain't that something? So if you go to ncrec.gov, and any of you can do this at any time, this is the Real Estate Commission's website. And if you go down to the bottom of their website at any given time, first of all, notice what is a big button right there that the public can do at any point in time.
File a complaint.
File a complaint against the licensee. But also, and you may
file one against you real quick.
You should. And you may want to peruse something called the bulletin when you get a chance, because the bulletin is where we have our own version of the slammer. You know that little thing you get like at the gas station where it shows everybody who got arrested and got in trouble?
Yes.
Well, we have our own version of that in a monthly bulletin. These are the disciplinary actions that the Real Estate Commission has taken. These are real firms and real people who have been disciplined by the Real Estate Commission. If somebody comes along and Googles their name, this will come up. In fact, the Real Estate Commission pays a search company to make sure this gets filtered to the top of the search results. So if you look at, like, there's the second one right there. It says, by consent, the commission reprimanded Fathom Realty North Carolina LLC effective June 20th of 2022. The commission found that the firm was and why do we call it a firm? What in there is hint that this is a firm?
LLC.
LLC. Does everybody recognize that when you see LLC? we're not talking about, we're not talking about an individual brokerage, an individual broker that was reprimanded. We're talking about an entire firm.
Damn, I know some. Oh,
it says the commission reprimanded Fathom Realty LLC effective June 20th, 2022. The commission found the firm was a listing firm for the sale of a residential property. The individual listing agent failed to verify the property's septic permit and advertised the property as having 4 bedrooms when the septic permit specified 3 bedrooms. So in other words, we did not properly disclose information, and not to our client. It's not a problem here of not disclosing to the client. Do you think that the commission, this was the listing firm, so who did they represent in the transaction?
seller.
Represent the seller, okay? So when they represent the seller in the transaction, this is not an issue of not disclosing to the seller. Who is it that you think that they failed to disclose this properly to?
Customers.
The public and the
Customers,
buyer.
AKA buyers, right?
Or potential clients.
Some buyer bought this house thinking that the septic permit was for how many bedrooms? 4. And it turned out to be what?
3.
So right there, you see a disciplinary action for failing to properly disclose material facts. So let's see.
How are you seeing August? I can't see it for some reason.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Maybe I'm not clicking on the right thing. I'm just curious.
That was some drama in that last one. But I was looking.
Well, look, I went back to June and there was only one in June, and it says.
So here's another one. Here's another one that's about failing to properly disclose. It says Mr. Kendrick had his license suspended for a period of 12 months. So for a year, folks, he can't work. Okay.
Ouch.
The commission found that Mr. Kendrick, acting as a broker in charge of a firm, also acted as a listing agent. Mr. Kendrick advertised the square footage of the subject property and the bedroom count based on his seller client's assertions and without independently verifying the information. Here's a life lesson. You don't believe nothing a seller tells you. Before you relay that information, what do?
You verify it.
You verify.
That is a really good point to bring back up the residential property owners and disclosure statement. We do not put any weight in that. That does not relieve us of our duty.
So that's right. So what if the seller put that on the residential property disclosure statement? That's not our form. Are y'all starting to see how that's not our form and that's not our deal? Right? And so he did not verify this information. So he gives incorrect information about bedroom count. He gives incorrect information about square footage. It says the seller of the subject property also made renovations to it, and Mr. Kendrick failed to verify whether the required permits were pulled prior to listing. Notice they didn't say he was told the wrong information. They said he failed to verify. So this next section that we're about to talk about, what's going to be the biggest piece of this? Verify, research, look. It's up to you to figure these things out so that they can be properly disclosed. A buyer went under contract to purchase the subject property and discovered during their due diligence just means inspections, that a septic permit could not be found and the permits were not pulled during the renovation. The buyer then terminated the contract. The subject property went under contract 2 more times prior to Mr. Kendrick updating the MLS advertisement. So not only did he fail to disclose this properly once, he failed to disclose it properly 3 times. 3 times. And so what's he doing for the next year?
Not working.
I know what he ain't doing for the next year.
Not selling real estate.
That's exactly right.
You know, this is a really good example though, because these are the kinds of brokers, either they just truly don't know the right way to do things, or they're just in it to make a quick buck. And that's not how we treat people. And the commission does not want us to treat people like that.
And so why do I show you that? Number one, you need to recognize that these rules that we talk about, they are serious. They have consequences, right? That once you're licensed as a professional, there's a reason you're going to be tested on this, because these are the standards you're going to be held to. And this section is where people really fall off. So one of the first things you have to ask yourself, anytime you get a question on the test, what should I disclose? What tea should I spill? What should I share? What information should I share? first thing you got to ask yourself is, who am I? Am I an agent or am I the seller? And what's the second question you have to ask yourself? Who am I disclosing what?
Client or customer?
To. Am I disclosing to a client or am I disclosing to a what? Customer. Because the list is going to be very different based on whether you're disclosing to a client or a customer. And
I mean, just take that disciplinary action, for example. The one guy, he didn't do the septic permit and disclose that properly. Well, he was representing the seller, but he didn't disclose it to buyers.
Right.
That should throw up some red flags like, oh God, I got to disclose some
well,
stuff
and
to
if we
everybody.
go back to that last disciplinary case, the not informing buyers about the permits, not telling them that, you know, the square footage was correct, you know, yada, yada, yada. None of those buyers were his clients. They were his what?
Customers.
His customers. And
Well,
that's
and
why
Natalie makes a really good point too. She said, I literally got an inspection or an appraisal and found out that the listing agent incorrectly stated that the square footage was more than what it was. And we were under contract and my realtor broker shared the info without my knowledge or consent. And the listing agent changed it on realtor.com, shaking my head. I want to touch base on that because I understand where you're coming from, that you might have felt the need to give permission, but we have an obligation to let all parties know certain things.
Here's the news that you're going to learn, Natalie. Your agent did the right thing. It's the listing agent who did the wrong thing. Your agent is supposed to inform the listing agent that they have incorrect information.
Whether you say it or not.
Whether you say it or not. Because what's the whole purpose of disclosure rules? You tell it.
Tell everything.
Right? And so not everything. And that's what we have to be careful about. You can't say tell everything unless we telling it to who?
Your client.
Your client. In this case, Natalie's agent was not telling it to her client because that's Natalie. They're telling it to a what? What do we call anybody else who's not a client?
A customer.
So what we need to examine as we go through this is, did Natalie's agent do the right thing by relaying that information to that customer? Is that information that was required to be revealed to a customer? And I'm going to go ahead and give you a free answer. Yes, it was. But it was the listing broker who did the wrong thing in the first place. Because when do you think Natalie should have been made aware of the correct information by the listing broker?
Prior to the offer?
Prior to an offer. Prior to making that offer. And Natalie, here is what I would point you to, and I'm going to change my share one more time because I think it's an important juncture to point this out. That's what the button's for. That's why it's there. You have a legitimate complaint. That's what it's there for.
Mm-hmm.
The listing broker clearly did not live up to the expectations. And what the commissioners will tell you this all the time. I know all 9 of them. I am friends with all of them, some of them close personal friends, and they will all tell you the same thing. When people complain, they'll say, file the complaint, file the complaint, file the complaint.
That does not go to an empty box that doesn't get read.
Right.
It will get read.
They can't do anything about it until people file the complaint. And that's when the ball starts to roll. And so why do we show you that? Why do we detour into that? Because I think it gets your attention about why this is important.
I know, right? Always said it's important to learn to drive the speed limit now. Yes, especially for your test.
Absolutely.
Hey, somebody actually messaged me privately, said in the last example, it said the person who bought it could not locate the septic permit. What if we as an agent can't find it? What would we need to do?
We're going to talk about that. What we are required to do is do the research and disclose what we have found as part of our research. If it's not available, then what should we disclose?
It can literally not be found.
Nothing. It's not available. Not nothing, because we do know something about the septic permit. What do we know about it?
It's there. Not applicable.
It doesn't exist. Whether it existed at some point in the past, we do not know, but it does not exist now. See, that's where you have to understand. You have to shift your mindset, folks. You can't go, well, I looked and I didn't find anything, so I'm just not going to say nothing. No, you give the information you have about that topic. If that's a required disclosure, it's required that you disclose what you know.
We can't find it or it's not available is the disclosure.
That's what you disclose. I've looked, can't find it. Yep. Shane, you had your hand up.
I don't know how to exactly ask you this, but situation like my house, because I don't want to get in trouble, get suspended or whatever. But my house is a 2,300 square foot home with a bonus room. At the time I built it, it was unfinished. So I finished it. That added 500 extra square feet.
We're gonna later on down the road, we'll get to how you calculate living area.
Okay, I just want to say, go in there, you didn't want to lie on the MLS and say you had different square footage.
Yep, you will get to how living area is accurately calculated. Yep.
Okay.
Some stuff will shock you.
Okay. Brady asks, is it sometimes easier to pawn off on an inspector, i.e. to do the research or safer? Absolutely. Here's what you need to understand, Brady. That's not pawning it off. That's taking responsibility. But that doesn't mean tell somebody to get an inspection. That is pawning it off. If you're not going to investigate the property yourself, that means pay an inspector to investigate the property so that you have the information to properly make the disclosures. And this is one of the hardest lessons to learn as a real estate broker is how to properly disclose things to customers. It's going to be a big, big deal. We have a name for these items. The things that we are required by law as licensees to disclose to customers are known as material facts. Now, these are different. These are different than the things we're required to disclose to our clients. Remind me again, what are we required to disclose to our clients in the transaction?
That's an easy one.
Everything. So is it fair to say that we're required to disclose material facts to our clients as well?
Yes.
Yeah, because clearly material facts falls under the category of everything, right?
Yes.
Material facts, though, is a very limited part of everything. Customers only get material facts. Does everybody see the difference there? Yes?
Yes.
Hey, good. Craig said that when you file a complaint, is there an option to be anonymous? There is. There is. Alexia, you had your hand up.
This is just briefly back where we just were. If you can't find the septic permit, like you said, do you have to tell them in writing? Do you have to give
We're going to talk about that. It's a great question. I'm going to go ahead and answer it, but we're going to talk about it. All disclosures, even if the disclosure is to say, I can't find what we're looking for, all disclosures, whether they are to clients or to customers. Everybody listen, because it's going to be tested. You ready? Any disclosure, you have not satisfied the disclosure rule until you have disclosed it in writing prior to the buyer making an offer.
Right.
Put it in your notes. Until you, even if I tell the buyer we couldn't find the septic permit, I have not satisfied the rule because I have not put it in what?
Right.
I have not put it in writing.
And yes, that covers email, that covers text, that covers anything.
That's right. It doesn't have to be on some special paper. It could be an email, it could be a text message, it could be a Snapchat, it could be a napkin, it could be, anything. Write it in sidewalk chalk, take a picture and send it to them. That's in writing, but they must be made in writing prior to the time of offer. So material facts are facts about the property or the transaction which would potentially change the seller or buyer's mind about the transaction. They can include things that are wrong with the property or things that are good about the property, things that would change its value one way or the other. The important thing to understand is that material facts are very limited. This is not everything that we disclose to our clients. These are going to be a limited set of facts that the state says, I don't care if it's not your client, you still have to do what with this information to that customer?
Disclose it.
Disclose. You have to disclose it. In what format?
In writing.
In writing. When?
Before
that buyer makes an offer. So these people that were disciplined, when should they have told the buyer that they couldn't find the septic permit?
For the
offer, and they should have told them in what format?
Friday.
Right? Everybody following so far?
Yeah.
Okay. So here's the thing I want you to understand. We're not the seller. Remember, sellers can get off by checking no representation on that form. We don't touch that form, folks, for filling it out purposes. We don't have no representation as an option. And this is a bitter pill to swallow for a lot of licensees, but you better get comfortable with it early on in your career. There will come a time when your answers on that form or their answers on that form are different than your disclosures. There will be a time when your seller is saying no representation. I don't want to talk about that. And you have to say to them, well, you don't have to, but what?
I do.
I do. And folks, here's why this is the hardest part of the job. Is that going to create tension between you and your client because they look at you and go, you're supposed to be my agent. You better not be saying that shit. You better not be telling them the roof leaks. Are they going to get hot about that?
Yeah,
Absolutely.
I'm sorry, Mr. Seller. I am representing your best interests at this point.
Yes.
I have to tell this. Anybody else would have to tell it. And if they didn't, they would be doing you a severe disservice.
Absolutely.
Could they choose if you're their agent? Could they say, you know what? I don't even want to work with you.
Well, so that we're going to answer that question more in detail when we get to 3.5, when we talk about agency agreements. Here's the thing, Danielle. Do you think it would be important for us to have a written agreement with them that they're already committed to working with us before we having that conversation?
Yes.
Yes, because then they're going to say, I don't want to work with you. And be like, so sorry. You already signed a contract saying you are hiring us. So you could, I mean, we'll be glad to go away if you want us to go away, but you're going to pay us. So, you know, because it is a tough conversation to have. Now, I will point this out. There is a third avenue here. It's not just hide it or disclose it. What's the third avenue for most of these issues? A leaky roof, a malfunctioning plumbing system. What could the
inspection?
Fix it. Fix it before we market it so that I don't have to disclose the issue. Does that make sense for everybody?
Yeah.
Yes.
And so what the conversation becomes for me with seller clients in particular is, here are the things I have discovered about your property that I'm going to be required to disclose. Now, here's where you get to make a choice. Would you rather, for each one of these issues, and we're going to go through them one by one, would you rather me disclose it or would you rather correct it before we put your property on the market? Do y'all think it's fair to give your client that opportunity?
Yeah.
Yes.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I want to remind everybody, we talk about caveat emptor, but I remember when this hit me, it hit me like a brick. That doesn't apply when a real estate broker is involved in the transaction.
Right. It doesn't apply to us. It might apply to the seller, but not to us. That's right. Jessica?
Okay, so when I took the quiz for this topic, I got number 4 wrong. That was talking about Sam Sleazy was basically telling his agent about the agreement, or basically saying, like, I got it wrong, or maybe I should read the question. I'm sorry.
Maybe you shouldn't. I don't worry about questions. I worry about topics. What's the problem?
Okay,
What's hanging
so
in your brain?
I got it wrong.
I don't care about that part.
I was just wanting to know because the answer is saying that it should have been that the agent.
I don't want to know about the question, Jessica. I want to know about the topic. Give me the you're so focused on the question. Give me what the question is asking. Don't read it to me. Summarize it, because I think you will come to your own answer. This is a teaching tool. So what's the question asking?
It's asking if basically what the agent should do based
in
on
what situation? What's the situation?
So the situation is that the seller has an issue and he's telling his agent not to do it, and so it's asking what the agent should do. And so
an issue with the property?
Yes.
So what should the agent do?
Disclose it. And so that's what I selected, but then it's telling me that they should refuse the listing unless the seller agrees to disclosing the information.
Well,
so
I mean, that's the same thing, right? It's saying, if I continue to represent you, I'm going to have to do what?
To disclose it.
To disclose it. I mean, you can't hold them down and tackle them on the floor and beat them into submission. If they don't want to disclose, they don't want to disclose. But you can't continue to represent them if they're not going to let you do your job.
Okay.
Yeah. You're being too literal. I mean, obviously, if somebody says to you, I'm not going to let you disclose that, you're going to say, then I can't list the property for you.
Okay.
That doesn't mean you don't get paid. If they've already signed a listing agreement, I'd be like, and pay me my damn money while I don't list the property
Then
for
maybe
you.
that's what it was. I got ahead
I know
of
that's where you got the hang up. You're sitting there thinking, well, I don't want my money. You still gonna get your money because you're gonna say to the seller, here it is, Jack. My job is to disclose. You already agreed to pay me for listing your house. You're gonna pay me for listing your house. Whether I list it or not, you're gonna pay me for listing it. But you can't make me break the law. What do we say? Obedience to our client unless they ask us to do what?
Yeah.
Break the law.
Unless they ask us to
Okay.
break the law.
So
We don't go there.
That makes sense. Okay, now I
There
get
you
what
go.
you're doing.
There you go. Okay. Sam said, is the only penalty for not disclosing suspension or losing a license, or is there a grace period like between the buyer and the seller? First of all, no grace period. And it's definitely not the only penalty. As a matter of fact, those people that you saw in those disciplinary actions are probably going to be the least of their concerns.
Right, the best.
Because let me tell you what's going to happen next. You know how when you get a speeding ticket, where do you get all these letters from all of a sudden when you get a speeding ticket?
Attorneys.
From attorneys.
They're my best friend.
Because they know you need an attorney, right?
Right.
So do you think there might be attorneys in North Carolina that look at those disciplinary actions and then figure out, oh, the person who bought this house got taken advantage of by a real estate agent? Do you think that might happen?
Yes.
Yep.
How many letters are those buyers that bought that property going to get from attorneys?
Many.
A lot of them. What's coming next in that real estate agent's life? That, by the way, during the 12 months that he can't work and make any money.
Oh,
a lawsuit. And is the disciplinary action by the real estate commission going to be submitted as evidence that the agent was wrong?
Yes.
Yes. So to answer your question, Sam, no, the disciplinary action is not the only consequence. It's the only consequence from the real estate commission, but you can certainly be sued by the public for not doing your job. Yeah. Natalie?
Travis, that person that just asked that, Sam, I wanted to jump off their question, like the grace period, like how far back does it go? Is there like an expiration date? Like once it's been there for 20 years?
There's no statute of limitations on a real estate broker not doing their job.
Wow. Okay, so it's going to be there forever.
Correct. That's correct.
There's always potential.
There are complaints routinely filed for things that happened 5, 6, 7, 10 years ago. Because think about it this way. If a buyer bought a house where the square footage was misrepresented, when are they likely to figure that out? They don't know it now. They just bought the house. They're happy. When are they likely to figure it out?
When they try to sell it.
When they get ready to sell it. When they get ready to sell it and they hire their own agent, and their own agent comes in there and they measure it 6, 7, 8, 10 years later, and their agent's like, I don't know where 3,300 square feet come from. I'm coming up with 2,800. Is somebody going to be hot?
100%.
Yes.
And that's when they're going to go file the complaint.
They're going to think they either overpaid or underpaid.
Prepare not to sleep the rest of your life, because you can absolutely get a complaint filed about something that happened 10 years ago, because real estate is a long-term business.
Right.
And Travis, you can get sued even if when you were a listing agent, now you're not a listing agent anymore, the person that was the listing agent at the time.
Of course. I mean, it's what you were at the time.
Complaint.
You were responsible at the time. That's right.
There's a recent lawsuit, I think it was either this year, I think it was this year, where a listing agent disclosed square footage wrong like 5, 6 years ago, like you said.
Yep.
It's
absolutely
legit.
And lost $75,000 in court over misrepresenting the square footage.
Yes.
7 years after the fact.
It's crazy.
Christina?
Yes. So let's say that you go after a broker for something that you do not now. And then when you get ready to sell the house, you find other things. Can you go after that broker again?
Are you asking in court?
Yeah, like if I find a complaint, for example, about the flood.
And you find an additional issue later on, can you file an additional complaint?
Yes.
Sure, of course you can. I mean, it's separate issues.
Limitations.
Right, it's separate issues. I mean, one doesn't, just because you found one mistake doesn't mean there's not others. And yeah, my guess is you won't have to find the others, because when you file a complaint, the real estate commission is going to tear that transaction apart. They'll find the other mistakes.
Right. And
Trust me,
yes,
when they come in to investigate, they don't ask nicely.
So, and we do say this to scare you because it is very serious, as you can see. Brady had actually mentioned something about E&O insurance, and I guess we'll get to that at some point, but there are things to help you stay covered in the event something like that happens, but that still doesn't.
You know what the best protection is, though, Seth? Doing the job right the first time. There it is. If you learn it and do it right, folks, you're not going to be exposed to a bunch of liability. You don't have to worry about it.
Now, and so there will be things where you're doing your job and there's just something where it was like,
well, you
I
make
can't
a
believe
mistake.
I missed that.
You make a mistake. We all do.
That's where
why you have insurance. That's why you have insurance. Exactly. Okay. Jessica?
Could you kind of say that, like, if I am the listing agent and then the buyer does their own personal home inspection and it's solid, you can say like, okay, that's also another reassurance, like I'm kind of good, right?
Well, yes and no, but here's the thing. I don't want you to rely on that, because when is a buyer likely to do an inspection on a property?
After they're under contract.
And when were we supposed to disclose things to the buyer?
Before they made an offer.
Before they made an offer. See, you're too damn late. As my granddad would say, you're just too damn late. You know, it doesn't matter if the buyer comes in and has an inspection. They find out after they made the offer, you missed the boat. Right.
And so Danielle, just to kind of like reassure everybody's questions, you know, Danielle asked you, firms usually retain legal representation in instances like this. Yeah, right now we are in the shit has hit the fan.
We're
scenario.
only learning the law, right?
But there's going to be coverage.
How y'all are worried about the fallout of it. You can't worry about that. You don't even have the license yet. You got to learn the rules and learn how not to violate the rules. And then you worry about protecting yourself from the fallout. But again, as Seth mentioned earlier, what's the best protection from not having to worry about the fallout?
Do your job correctly.
Do your job the first time. You do your job the first time.
Disclose that you can't find the septic.
Right.
Disclose certain things.
Right. Measure the property yourself and make sure that square footage that you're putting out there is accurate to the best of your
Double
ability.
check the appraiser if you have
or
to.
hire an appraiser to measure it for you if you don't have time to go measure it yourself. Those are all options, right?
It's too hot outside. I'm going to hire somebody.
That's it. And that brings us to this next slide. Folks, is it enough to just rely on what the seller tells you about the property as a listing?
No way.
No.
Our job is not to just disclose material facts. Our job is to look for them. Our job is to discover material facts. Our job is to check. And so what the real estate commission will say, and this is where it gets to be in a gray area that some people struggle with, but I'll tell you, it's not as hard as you can make it in your brain. The real estate commission says that what they're going to look for, if there's a complaint that a broker failed to disclose a material fact, they're not just going to look at whether the fact existed or not. That's not enough. The existence of a material fact does not mean the broker did the wrong thing. I'm going to say that again.
Right.
Buyer buys a house. They were not told that the roof leaks. That does not automatically mean the broker screwed up. Because what the real estate commission is going to look at if the complaint is filed is, was there some sign that there was a leak in the roof? Was it possible for the broker to know that there was a leak in the roof? Is this something that was reasonably possible for the broker to be aware of? Did they look? If they looked, if they did their homework, if they did their research and they still didn't find the issue, they're probably not going to be held responsible for it. What do you think is the case for most brokers who are found guilty of failing to disclose things, of omitting material facts? What do you think is mostly true? They never even what? Never looked. They never checked.
You know, this entire time I'm hearing us talk about we need to disclose the material facts. We need to look for and disclose them, but I don't hear anything about we need to diagnose a material fact.
Exactly. Amen. We are not licensed electricians, plumbers, builders, contractors, HVAC repair people. We are none of those things. But here's the thing, because that excuse gets used all the time in these disciplinary hearings. I was actually at a disciplinary hearing 2 weeks ago at the real estate commission. The commissioners were there. They had a disciplinary hearing. and it dealt with an HVAC issue. Now the complaint was filed in July. What's the temperature like in North Carolina in July?
10.
90.
Warm,
Hot
right?
as hell,
It's
Kathleen.
hot.
Right. We had a complaint from a buyer who bought the property sight unseen, moved from California, bought the property sight unseen, never seen the property, never been in the property. Everybody with me so far?
Yeah.
Yep.
Yes.
Listing broker doesn't disclose any material facts. They don't disclose any. First of all, that in and of itself is a red flag. Y'all ever seen a property that didn't have some problem with it?
Yep.
I mean, I haven't. I've been in this business a long time. I have not come across a property that doesn't have some issue, right? Yeah. But listing broker has not disclosed any material facts. So buyer makes an offer without having seen the property. Does it become even more important in that instance to make sure the buyer is aware of material facts before they make their offer, folks?
Yes.
Yes. Because they're essentially taking your word for it, are they not?
Yes.
Now, remember, this broker represented the seller, so they're not disclosing everything to that buyer customer, but they are responsible for looking for material facts and disclosing them. Everybody with me on that?
Yes.
Okay. Buyer buys the property, moves from California, moves in. It's hot in the house. Call an HVAC company. HVAC company comes out and says, this condenser unit is completely rusted out. It needs a full replacement. You're looking at $12,000 to get an HVAC unit in the property. Non-functional. I mean, I don't mean it was halfway working. I mean, not functioning at all, completely rusted out, 20-year-old unit. Nothing's ever disclosed to the buyer about that. So, of course, the buyer files a complaint with the real estate commission. Now, fast forward, we're at the disciplinary hearing, and you got the broker up there, and you got the 9 members of the commission who are asking questions to the broker. And here's what the broker said. She said, well, I'm not an HVAC technician.
No.
I can't tell you when an HVAC system works. I'm not an expert on HVAC systems.
Right.
I don't understand HVAC systems. And one of my favorite members of the commission, she's incredible. She is one of the female pioneers in our industry. And she's awesome. She sat back and she looked over the top of her glasses. Y'all ever seen anybody look at you over the top of their glasses?
Judge Judy.
You done it, right? She looked over the top of her glasses. She said, I have one question. It's clear that you don't understand HVAC systems. Do you understand hot? Because I am pretty sure that if you are listing a home in Cary, North Carolina in July, if you had walked in the door and that HVAC system's not functioning, it's going to be hot in there.
Right.
And here's what the truth was. The real estate commission, in the course of the investigation, contacted every other agent who had shown that property to a buyer. What question do you think they asked them?
Was it hot when you went?
Do you remember if it was hot in this property when you showed it? And agents had notes. They were like, oh yeah, I put in my feedback that it was really hot in the house, that the thermostat was set on 72, but it was like 85 in there. And I put it in, and I made sure and let the listing agent know. Buried them. Absolutely buried them. You know what? Listing agent had never been in the house. They took the listing, had never visited the house, never bothered to walk through it. They didn't do their job. Did they look for material facts, folks?
No. If you haven't gone to the property, like Travis, you said, hire an inspector.
That's right.
Hire somebody
And
to
that's
come
the
out
thing.
there.
Nobody's
and look for
saying
you.
that listing agent personally has to go investigate the property. But do they have to, if they're not going to do it, do they have to hire somebody to do it for them?
Yes.
Yes. Get somebody in your firm to go look for you.
Right.
Like,
you got to take
not that hard.
responsibility. Got to take responsibility. Danielle, you had a question?
Yeah. So for us, we'll be starting off new. Is there some type of checklist? Because, there's a lot of things to look over. So is there some type of checklist that we're able to refer to make sure?
Here's the best advice I can give. Talk to somebody else in your office and say, when do you have a home inspection scheduled? Can I come along?
Right. Yes.
And follow the home inspector around and look at it through their eyes. And there's your checklist. That's what does it mean you have to do a full inspection on every home you list? No, but it does mean you'll get an idea of what they're looking for. And so therefore what can reasonably be found in spending a couple of hours going through the property. Does that make sense, Danielle?
Yes, you gain knowledge.
You do, you
Yes,
gain
sir.
knowledge.
You so do.
Yeah.
Or we can get a free consultation.
You can get a free consultation. Sometimes home inspectors will be glad to walk through it with you because they're hoping to gain your business as an agent. There's lots of resources for things like that.
Absolutely.
What's not,
I still want to go with home inspectors nowadays. I mean,
Yeah.
seriously, I will.
you learn something
because
every time.
You learn how to look through the eyes of a buyer.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, and here's the thing. You should go through a home that you're about to market in the same way that you would go through a used car you're about to buy on the lot. When you test drive a used car, do you not touch all the buttons because you're scared that you don't want to, if somebody else says, I'm not going to touch it?
Yes.
Or do you go through there and turn everything on?
I turn
Everything.
I turn everything.
I mean, if I drive a used car, I drive it like I stole it because I want to know what I'm getting. We're going to try the brakes. We're going to try the handling. I'm going to know whether it goes 120 miles an hour that day. I'm going to run the thing through its paces, right? And that's exactly the way I list homes. I go through, we turn the heat on. I don't care if it's 95 degrees outside. Guess what Travis is going to turn on before he lists the property?
The heat.
Turn the heat. Hold your hand over the vent. Make sure warm air blows out. How hard is that?
Not hard at all.
Turn the air conditioning on. Flush every toilet. Turn the sinks on. Folks, you can do this kind of thing in 35, 45 minutes,
Right.
and you will avoid 95% of these disclosure issues just by checking.
Great
Natalie?
question.
Travis, in the case of like a roof leak or the AC HVAC not working, if the problem got fixed, is it material facts to say there was a problem?
That is a great question. Once it is fixed, it is fixed. And so we are not responsible for disclosing things that have been addressed, things that have been taken care of. That is not a material fact. Because again, remember, we're not talking to our clients. We're talking to customers. And to customers, material facts are just the facts. HVAC, we don't know what's going on with it. That's a fact, right? It's hot in the house. There's your material fact right there. Because it's enough that the buyer is aware there might be an issue. Does that make sense for everybody?
Yes.
Chris?
Yes. So from the standpoint of, say, for instance, the seller obviously lists the property, selling agent doesn't disclose material.
Wait a minute now. Ho.
Okay.
Because you just threw some word salad at me, and I don't think you said what you think you said. Because here's what you said: seller lists the property, and selling agent fails to disclose. Selling agent is somebody working with a buyer. Do you mean?
Oh, sorry.
Do you mean
Yes,
listing agent
Yes,
fails to
listing agent.
disclose?
Sorry, yes.
Yeah.
yes,
All
yes,
right,
yes,
there we
yes.
go. Okay.
And look, we're doing that for everybody. 'cause
Yeah, we're doing
somebody
it for
did to me
everybody. We got to get
today.
you on the right page of that
That is not
terminology.
a quick
Yeah.
little oops.
Yeah,
Okay, perfect. Sorry about that.
that's all right.
You're good.
Just looking at it from the buyer standpoint, okay, buyer goes ahead, tries to go under contract, does an inspection, realizes things were not disclosed. If they were to back out the deal, is it then on the listing agent's side to disclose that to future potential buyers of the property?
Of course. What a great question. If we find out subsequent things, here, and I've had people ask me this, well, what if I didn't disclose it before somebody made an offer because I didn't know about it, but now I do know about it? We'll disclose it right away at that point in time. And to future buyers, absolutely. Great question, Chris. Great question. And that does happen. That does happen. Sometimes buyers will come in and we've done our due diligence. We've disclosed material facts to the best of our ability, and they have a much more detailed inspection done on the property. They bring a structural engineer out, right? And the structural engineer says, well, everything looks pretty good at first glance, but I've noticed some settlement problems here. Well, now I got a new material fact that needs to be disclosed because now I'm aware of this thing that I was not aware of before.
Yes.
Absolutely.
There's potentially unlimited amount of material facts on a property.
Yeah.
Not everyone's going to come into a dispute, but you just do the best you can.
You have to. And there's no limitation on this thing, folks.
Yes.
Material facts
could be
must
closed,
be disclosed. It
sold.
could be under contract. It'd be closed. It'd be whatever. When
could be
you
sold
come
5
into
times.
contact with this information, if it falls on the category of material fact, it has to be disclosed. It must. Okay. Now, don't take that too far. Jordan, I see your hand. I'll come to you in just a second. Don't take that too far, especially on a test. Here's where they're going to trap you on a test. You ready for the trap? Because it's coming. I'm going to tell you what they're going to do to you. There's going to be an answer choice that says brokers have to disclose all material facts. It's no. I'm telling you, this is going to be the soundtrack of your test if you answer that.
How are we going to disclose every potential material fact?
You'll never know them all. There's always going to be things that are hidden, that are things beyond what we can see or what is reasonable for. Does that make sense for everybody?
Yes.
Like, for example, the well is contaminated with triethylene. How the hell would I know that? No, that's not reasonable. Now, if I find out later, would I be responsible for disclosing it once I've found it out? Once some expert has told me that it's contaminated?
Yes.
Yes. But I can't be held responsible for everything like that. Jordan?
Yes, I was gonna make the young lady asked the question about repairing the situation before you sell the house. We had a person come and make a contract on our home, and she accepted it. But when she left, we had a leak in our ceiling. And so we repaired that leak before they came back and re-inspected it. So that was, so it's really great to go ahead and get it done before that next inspection comes, because they're going to come back and inspect it again.
Well, and again, what you point out is exactly right. There's always two options: disclose it or fix it, right? Disclose it or remediate it, because once you've eliminated the issue, then you don't have a disclosure issue, okay?
Kylie, remember, no matter what the seller tells us, it doesn't matter.
And see, Kylie,
we need to disclose.
I love that you asked that question, Kylie. Kylie, so what if the seller tells you they think something's wrong, but they're not sure? Remember, we're not relying on what the seller says, but here's the thing. If the seller says, I think something's wrong, what should you go do?
Check it out.
Check it.
Go check.
Verify.
You go check. And at bare minimum, even if you can't figure it out, what's the material fact that you should relay to customers? The seller believes there might be an issue with this. We're not sure what the issue would be. At least you've relayed the knowledge that you have. Does that make sense for everybody?
Yeah, so I think we have also a question here. I see we have some people here in the chat. So I think, let me see, it's Caitlin. She had asked, so in that case, if you're not aware of a material fact until it is under contract, would it still be on you? I think we know this question, but it also is loaded. It depends.
I mean, if you become aware of a material fact and you already passed the point of offer, folks, what do you think you're going to do with that material fact?
Number one, disclose it.
Disclose it. Disclose it. You're already past the deadline. You don't get excused from the deadline because you're past it. What's the first thing you do when you realize when you stayed out too late? You're supposed to be home at 11 o'clock and it's 11:30. Do you just never come home again, or do you come home late?
You got to start making your way downtown.
You got to start fixing things at some point. So if you realize, okay, I was supposed to have disclosed this before the time of offer, I didn't, and now I know it, what do you do immediately?
Start doing the right thing.
Do the right thing and disclose it.
Now, as far as would it be on you still, was it reasonably known? Was it hidden? Was it latent? As far as responsibility.
Exactly. That's going to be what the real estate commission is really digging into. Was it reasonable for the agent to have known this so that it could have been disclosed appropriately? Yeah. And really what they're going to look, and they're not going to hold us to some crazy standard, folks. They're looking for obvious things. What did my favorite commissioner ask the agent? Okay, you're not an HVAC expert, but do you understand what?
It's hot.
That ain't hard.
Sweating?
Are you sweating when you show in the house? Something's
It
wrong.
don't take a rocket scientist.
You know, something's wrong.
Now, I do have to put somebody on the spot. I'm not going to put them all out there though, but I do want this person to absolutely get it. So they said, should only the seller's agent look for material facts or the buyer's agent? And I said, come on, are you really asking me that?
Everybody with a license. Now, generally this falls more on the seller's agent, but do you think buyer's agent should also be having their eyes open when they view properties?
Absolutely.
Yes.
And that gets us back to, and I forget who said this earlier, and I think I don't even want to say a name because I don't really remember who said this in the chat. Somebody said without their permission, their buyer's agent shared with the listing agent when the square footage was off. Does that, y'all remember that comment in the chat from earlier? And I don't remember who made it.
Like forever ago.
Did the buyer's agent do the right thing by saying to the listing agent, hey, your square footage is wrong?
Yeah.
Yes. Because it's a material fact. Once we realize that mistake is there was Natalie. The agent, the buyer's agent did the right thing. It's the listing agent who did the wrong thing by not verifying the square footage in the first place. But you see how that very real world situation played out, right?
Yeah.
Natalie, did you have a question?
Yeah, just real quick. Since the sellers are in no obligation to tell the truth when they
I'm
fill
scared where
out
this is going.
the residential mandatory form. So my question is, since there's caveat emptor, and if it's a for sale by owner.
Here's the thing, Natalie. Let me answer your question before you even get it out. There are 3 different sets of disclosure rules and they don't mix with each other. Who is the seller responsible for filling out that form for?
The buyer.
Buyer. Has the seller filled out the form?
Yes.
I'm asking you, has the seller filled out the form? And you're hypothetical in your brain, have they filled the form out?
No.
Okay, so then the seller didn't do their job. They didn't fill the form out. So what's the penalty for the seller for not filling the form out?
Sued. Get sued.
No, that is not the penalty. See, you need to go back to the section we covered this morning and y'all help her out here. What's the penalty for a seller who does not fill the form out?
3 days recession.
Buyer has the right to back out for 3 days. That's the only penalty to the seller. So seller's out of the picture. Forget the seller, forget the disclosure statement. That doesn't matter anymore. Now, what's the rest of your question?
So basically, in a for sale by owner situation, if they
Again, okay, a for sale by owner situation, so no agents involved as a listing agent, okay?
And they disclose incorrectly.
Who is they?
If the seller fills out the form.
We've already covered the seller. Did the seller fill out the form? You said what?
No.
Yeah.
You said
now, yes, I meant.
Oh, now you're okay. And so now, yes. So the seller's done their job. They filled the form out. They've done their job.
And they put no, and so they filled it out incorrectly. Can the buyer sue the seller?
That's for a court to answer, not for me. Because guess who the real estate commission doesn't apply to?
For
sellers.
Sellers and buyers, people who don't have real estate licenses.
Right.
Okay.
See, we're not concerned about what they do. And that's the break you've got to put in your brain. Do we care what the sellers and buyers do as far as these disclosures go, folks? Do we care at all?
No, we do not.
No.
We
Between them.
operate completely separate from them because we follow a different set of rules. And you've got to get that in your brain. It doesn't matter what the seller says, what the seller does, what the buyer wants. When it comes to disclosure, we play by different rules. The seller has one set of rules. What's the seller's one rule? Do what?
Fill out the form.
Fill out the form. If they've done that, they have satisfied the rule as far as we're concerned.
And I want to clarify something on that. A for sale by owner is still obligated to fill that form out, whether they know it or not.
They're still obligated to fill the form out. If they've filled it out, they've met their obligation. Now, the question was, if they lie, that's for a court to answer. That's not a real estate brokerage question. That's a dispute between a buyer and a seller. They can sue each other.
And Travis, if you're the buyer's agent, it's your duty and it's your fiduciary duties to tell your client, if you're the buyer's agent, something is wrong here.
Well, the buyer's agent has a responsibility to find and disclose material facts, just like any other agent would associated with the transaction. So here's the better question, Natalie, coming from your question. If you are a buyer's agent, should you be more worried about a transaction where the seller is unrepresented, where it's a for sale by owner? Should a buyer's agent in that situation take the time to go investigate the property themselves in detail before they let their buyer make an offer so that the buyer's agent can disclose material facts?
Yes.
Yes.
You better believe it. Because
And
they
a lot of
know
these-
there's nobody else on the other side doing it.
Right.
A lot of these questions you guys can answer for yourselves, and that's what we're trying to get you to do, because that's what you'll have to do on your
Right.
exam. Like Christina asked, what if it's a seller who's a broker who's misrepresenting himself? Same thing.
Here's the thing,
He's a
the same
broker.
rules apply. When they're the seller, apply the seller rules. When they're the broker, apply the broker rules. If they're both,
And we-
apply what?
Um,
Both sets of rules.
Now, We get it. We're cutting you some slack. It's the first week, but we want you to get to the point where you can take these concepts and have the confidence to answer it for
That's
yourself.
exactly right. Because here's what you've got to do, folks. You have to stop inventing scenarios and say, I'm going to ask Travis about this one. What you
This is an exception.
Because inventing the scenarios is great, but then you have to learn, apply the basic rules that we've learned to that scenario. Because that's all the real estate commission does. They got like 12 rules total. All they do on a situation is apply those 12 rules.
To different
And that's what you've got to learn to do.
Yeah.
Rather than trying to memorize 100 different situations, just work your way through the situation.
Right. Now, somebody did ask me something privately, and I'm going to keep them anonymous, but I'm very disappointed. So it says, if they're building a train track across the street, should you randomly, I say disappointed, just being funny. If they're building a train track across the street, should you mention this to every customer that comes into the property or only when they ask it?
Well, I'm going to jump in on that one. Only when they ask it. Folks, have we said anything at all when we've talked about this disclosure of material facts that it requires somebody asking? Or is this something we should be volunteering?
Screaming.
This is something we should be volunteering. So what do we think? If we are reasonably aware that there is either a train track across the street or the possibility that a train track could be across the street, is that a material fact then that we need to be disclosing to every customer?
Yes.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Look, and we never say anything to offend or hurt anybody's feelings. We just have to drive a point home.
Yeah,
that's all
absolutely. Shanar?
I have a question. Here's the case. For example, I hired the home inspector to inspect the house. So, and home inspector did a job, but he wasn't experienced and he gave incorrect information. Based on that information, I disclosed that property and it's wrong. Later, they find out that I disclosed wrong. But I rely on the information of the home inspector.
Doesn't matter to the real estate commission. Who are they going to hold responsible every time?
The agent.
The agent. The agent.
Okay.
That's why you have to make sure you hire people who are competent.
Okay.
Yeah. There's no free ride here.
Okay.
You are the professional. You are the expert. So whoever you choose, and I've had people say, well, what if I don't have an inspector? That's fine. If you think that they are able enough to do the job and you're willing to put your license on the line for what they find, then by all means, let them do the inspection for you. So does that tell you you should really trust people that you hire to do these kinds of things for you?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Absolutely. Calvin, did you have a question? I saw your hand go up and then go back down.
Yeah, I just wanted to point out that as a North Carolina licensee, you're going to be held to a higher standard. So you have to get that through your head now.
Yep.
A much higher standard applies.
You're not a member of the public anymore. That's exactly right. You are the So here are some of the questions, and I giggle in my head sometimes when y'all ask me these questions, but I understand it's hard to get around. Let me ask it in a different profession and tell me what you think. If a surgeon comes out of surgery and says, I'm sorry they died, he didn't tell me he had a heart defect, would that be a valid excuse for not suing the hell out of that surgeon who didn't bother to check that the person had a heart defect before they put him under anesthesia? Or would we say, you should have checked?
Oh, you should have
It's your
checked.
job.
Big old hell no for me.
It's the same thing, folks. They're a licensed professional in that field. We're a licensed professional in this field. It ain't enough to come back and say, I didn't know, because the answer is what?
You should have known.
You should have known.
We're brain surgeons of real estate.
Unless it truly is an issue that you couldn't have known reasonably.
Right. Now, somebody did ask me, and I can see where the question's coming from. It is it's somebody who returned for extra knowledge. Who pays for the inspector?
It's that I don't care. Santa Claus. I don't care. What I care is that the inspection gets performed either by you or by somebody on your behalf, because the material facts have to be discovered and disclosed. That's all frivolous fluff. It doesn't matter who pays. You pay, get the seller to pay, get a buyer to pay, get your sugar daddy to pay. I don't care. Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter.
Let me know if y'all have one.
Rebecca,
I hate to take it back a few minutes because we did sort of spiral down, but this is kind of related to Natalie's hypothetical situation about the forced sale by owner. And as the buyer's agent, if it's a for sale by owner, I know what our responsibilities are to sort of go out and find these material facts, but what are our rights in terms of like, this is their home that they're selling and they don't have an agent? Like, can we just go onto their property and
No, you cannot. You cannot. And so you just presented a conundrum. I know what my responsibilities are, and they could tell me I can't go do them. Here's the thing: get that in writing. Get that in writing. So when in fact, and tell your buyer, I would love to disclose material facts to you. I've tried. The seller won't let me access the property. Do you think the real estate commission is going to hold you responsible and say, no, you should have snuck in there like some paratrooper in the middle of the night?
Okay, got it.
See? That's very reasonable. You know,
Right.
say, I tried to access the property. I've had that happen. I've had sellers say, no, you can't come to the property. You can't do this. Because I've had sellers where I've said, can I come measure the house? Because I don't think the square footage you've got here is right.
No.
They've said no. So I tell my buyer, I have reason to believe the square footage is not right, but the seller said I ain't going to take time to measure it. So FYI, you know.
All right, keep that paper trail. All right.
That's
thank
right.
you.
Because here's the thing, the material fact, folks, and Seth said this earlier, but it's hard to get in your head. The material fact is not the detailed information. The material fact is your suspicion that there's a problem. And whatever information
Whether that be you
have,
can't find the
right.
documentation.
Maybe if you walk in and you see mold on the ceiling, you don't know where the mold is coming from. It could be a leak. It could be moisture inside the house. It could be old. It could be current. It could be, but you do know what's the fact that needs to be disclosed, folks. What's the fact?
Moisture.
Just the fact.
It's
The
wet.
moisture.
There's mold, which comes from moisture. We don't know where the moisture is coming from. You know, if you want to investigate that further, you can. But because remember, we're not talking to our clients at that point in time. We're talking to who? Customers. We shouldn't be giving them advice anyway. Wet, mold, fact, buy. That's it. No? Janet, I think you had one.
I have an inspector that I've used for all my buying and selling, and he's so picky and like gets everything. And I've had other ones that don't do as much. Is it almost not smart to do a pre-inspection as a, to pay for it, or ask your seller to pay for it, because then you know way too much? And
No, it's completely the opposite. It's absolutely smart, because you're going to be held responsible for it whether you know it or not. Because here's what the real estate commission is going to say to you. Well, you should have disclosed this. And you're going to say, well, I didn't know. And they said, all it took was an inspection and you chose not to do that.
But then they're more liable to have to fix more stuff. But I guess that's the best way.
And absolutely they are. But here's the thing, Janet, you want them to be liable or you to be liable? Because you got to choose which one. If you don't make them fix it and you don't disclose it, you just put the liability on you.
Right.
Yeah, I think
you don't want every transaction to close if they're not going to be reasonable with it. You don't have to work with everybody.
Yep.
Yep. Okay, cool. Thanks.
Yep.
This is your business.
And the material facts is, like I said, it's one of the hardest things. And so this is one of those where I entertain a lot of questions, because it is a hard topic to wrap your brain around.
Somebody did message me and said that all these side topics are driving me crazy. I'm like, look, we get
Here's
it.
the thing. These are not side topics. This is the topic when you get.
And we will rein it back in. But it's
if I feel like it gets a field, I will. You notice what I said when we started talking about for sale by arm? Like, did the seller fill out the form? Fine, move on. Move on with your life, because that's all that because that material facts doesn't apply to sellers, right?
Right.
I'll shut it down when we need to. But agency is such a topic where you have to filter it around in your brain. Myra. I don't hear you. I don't see you muted, but I don't hear you. So your microphone's not working.
Can you hear me?
Now I can.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, we got the inspection done as well, and the same thing happened. Like, the inspector, there were so many things on there, and it kind of like freaked me out as a buyer.
Okay, you finally gave me the important information. You were a buyer, had an inspection. Okay, moving along. What's that?
Yeah, and there was just a lot of information on the paperwork that it seemed like it was like a lot of issues, but when you looked at it, when I spoke to my agent about it, we asked them to fix the more important stuff, because there was like things like the drain not draining slow, and like everything kind of freaked me out. But it's more about like the bigger issues.
But here's the thing, It's more about the bigger issues for you. For some people, the drain and the slow is a huge gaping issue. Here's what I need you to understand. You don't get to make that decision as a licensee. As a broker, I don't get to decide what's important to somebody. That's why they're called material facts. What do we do with the information, folks? Disclose it and let the buyer decide if it's something important for them. And I'm glad you said that because yes, that's exactly what we do with our clients. We coach them through the process, right? But material facts is not about our clients. Material facts is about our who?
Customers.
Our customers. See, you need to draw that distinction in your brain right now. I don't care what your agent did with you as a buyer's agent when it pertains to material facts, because material facts is not your buyer agent's job. Your buyer agent has so much more of a job than material facts. Material facts in your situation was the job of who?
Bare minimum.
Whose job was material facts in Myra's situation when she's buying a property?
I guess
her agent.
Selling.
Not her agent. No.
The listing?
The
Listing agent.
Because material facts is disclosures we make to who?
All
To
parties.
Customers. It was not the listing agent's job to sit there and go through that inspection report with Myra and say, well, this is important, this is not important. What's important? What is the job of the listing agent? To Myra, the customer.
Disclose material facts.
Here are the facts. Do with them what you want to.
I mentioned this a little bit too late because we had some really good questions, but material facts aren't always necessarily negative.
It can be positive.
They're mostly going to be negative, but they don't always have.
Let me give you an example. Let's say you are representing a buyer who is purchasing land, and you know, as their buyer's agent, that the land is going to dramatically go up in value because there's an exit coming on the interstate right there, and Sheetz wants to put a gas station there. You know it. You know the exit's going to be there, and you represent the buyer. Here's the thing. Does your buyer want you to tell the seller that that exit is coming there if the seller doesn't already know it? Does your buyer want you to disclose that information?
No.
But you have to.
No, but you have to because it's a what?
Material
fact. Now, the fact that it's going to change the fact it's going to change the value is not the material fact. The fact that the interstate is coming is the material fact. So what am I going to say to the seller? My buyer would like to purchase your property. FYI, the interstate's coming.
The sheet's coming.
It's up to the seller to decide if that's good, bad, or indifferent because they're not my client.
Right. We don't explain.
I'm giving them
you know this.
Just the facts.
Right. You don't explain to a customer this exit's coming and it's going to severely increase your property's value. We don't.
That's too much. That's for our clients.
Right. It's just exit coming.
You got to constantly come back to this differentiation of, am I talking to who?
Customer or
client. I cannot stress that enough because the more you try to force an answer to be the same, the further you are from passing this test. The answer is always different based on who you're talking to.
Right. So that exact scenario, like Apple coming to Cary, I think it's confirmed. To a customer, it's going to sound like, you know, Apple's coming and they're just going to develop. To a customer, you know, damn, Apple's coming. You want to buy client right now.
To a client, you mean?
To a client, yes, right. I'm sorry.
Yeah, you said customer both times, but he's exactly right. What would I say about Apple to a customer coming to Cary? What would I say about Apple coming to Cary?
Apple's coming to Cary.
It's
Apple's coming.
Period.
Yeah, whatever.
It's a fact, right? What would I say about Epic Gaming redeveloping Cary Town Center to a customer?
Girl,
to a customer
right now.
To a customer, I would say Epic Gaming's coming.
Oh, Epic Games. I'm sorry, I'm on the client
But if they were my client, wouldn't we have a detailed discussion about how that's going to impact the property, positive, negative, traffic, all those things? Because I owe clients so much what?
Right.
More information.
So much more.
Right. And it's going to depend on if that client is your seller or your buyer, but still the client gets your advice regarding it.
That's it. Now, here's the thing.
Natalie has her hand raised. Did we get you already from before?
You're muted. You're muted. You're talking, but you're muted.
Sorry. My internet went down. Sorry. Just real quick, if you're the listing agent and you suspect maybe termites and then you get an inspection done, and the inspector says no termites, but you kind of like don't, maybe the inspection is wrong, what should you do in that case?
Natalie, are you going to sit there and invent 60,000 scenarios that make no sense? I mean, this is where I love you, but I have to get tough love. I mean, that is some bullshit of the highest order right there. If you suspect termites, what's your job? Either disclose them or check for termites. If a licensed professional comes in and says there are no termites, do you need to disclose that there are termites?
No.
Or you can get a second
And you
opinion.
just disclose, I think there might be termites.
You absolutely. You would say, I had a suspicion that there were termites. We had it inspected.
inspection.
The inspector says there are no termites. Boom.
Facts. Yep.
There's the
Here's
information.
the report.
Just the what?
Facts.
Just the facts.
Okay.
Just the facts. I love you, Natalie, but that brain's going to kill you. You cannot
It's
face
just
that.
scary to be a listing
Listen.
agent knowing you can get sued for.
Listen, we get it, but it's also scary to be a dental hygienist and work in people's mouth. You could
Right.
make somebody numb for the rest of their
right.
life.
Every profession's got its risks. That's exactly
Yes. So that's why we harp on it.
right.
And also, if somebody asked about Carfax earlier for the residential property owners and disclosure statement, no, that is like the severe bullshit of a form ever invented. But we are the Carfax. To
We're the
all
Carfax.
customers.
We're the Carfax. That's exactly right. We're the ones doing the research. That's it.
Yes.
Erica says she had a question in the chat. I'll keep talking while she puts it there, unless you want to speak up, Erica. Or you, I'll go for it.
Here we go.
The material facts is still tripping me up. I keep missing it on the exam. That same question. So personal information, that's where I got tripped up.
Well, we're about to talk about what qualifies as a material fact. What is a material fact? You know, because up to this point, we've talked about once you've looked for them and you got to disclose them. Now we need to talk about what qualifies as a material fact.
Right. Wouldn't that be important?
Okay. So any fact about the property, anything, any defect, anything broken, anything not working. So foundation issue, is that a material fact if we're aware of it or we could have been aware of it?
Yes.
Electrical issue.
Yes.
Plumbing issue.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. The septic tank is flooding.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. All of those are defects, physical problems with the property. That is material fact. The next things that are material facts, things that happen around the property that impact the use of the property. What things impact the use of the property but are not on the property itself?
Zoning changes.
Zoning.
New rules.
How about HOA rules, covenants? You know, would HOA rules and covenants and restrictions in the neighborhood impact how somebody's going to use that property?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, that's a material fact. How about development coming in the area? They're about to widen the road. Would that be a material fact?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes. They're going to build a bunch of townhomes behind you over here. That's trees right now, but next month they're going to cut all the trees down and go and put up townhomes. Would that be a material fact?
Yes.
Yes.
There's an airport down the street.
Yes.
Yes.
There's train tracks across the road.
Yes, sir.
Yes, because they create what?
Noise.
Noise. We had a licensee discipline last year because they didn't disclose the Wake County dump next door to a property.
Oh.
Now, here's the thing. Here's the thing. The buyer claimed they didn't know the dump was there. The agent said, well, in my defense, the sign is right next door to their driveway that says landfill.
Did you tell that to your buyer?
But here's the thing. It doesn't matter if it's obvious. What are we still obligated to do if it's a material fact?
We assume that our clients
Disclose
are
it in
interested.
writing before they make an offer. Hello, the landfill is next door.
Right. We assume that our customers can't even read.
That's it. You got to tell them in writing before they make an offer. So,
theory.
Erica, you good so far on the first two categories of material facts? Defects with the property, stuff that impacts the property. You good so far?
And it might be coming up, Travis, but like you can't use the property for a business.
Well, that's zoning and rezoning. If somebody comes to you and says, well, I'm interested in buying a property because I want to put a Bojangles there. If somebody came to me and said that about my house in Cary, I'm interested in a property because I want to put a Bojangles there. Do you think it's a material fact for me to say, you can't put a Bojangles there, it's zoned for residential?
Yes.
Yes. Of course it is. Of course it is. Shinar?
So here's the example. We purchased this house last year, and we find out in our property there is a cemetery. Agent didn't disclose that fact, but it was on the deed.
Well, again, on the deed is only going to really come into the picture when we were trying to decide if it was reasonable for them to have disclosed it. Here's what I would ask as a bigger question. How do you know that the cemetery's there? Was it the deed that gave it away, or did you see headstones?
We find out later when we start living here.
Okay, but how did you find out? What gave it away?
We look at it on the deed.
Okay, so you looked at it on the paperwork. The only place it was available was on paperwork.
Yep.
Okay? Here's the thing, that paperwork's available publicly. If I told you the paperwork was available publicly prior to you buying, do you think that would qualify as a material fact that the agent should have disclosed?
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Because it's reasonable that they should have known it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Reasonable that they should have known it. This one, Erica, I think is the one that you're probably struggling with. There is a very limited set of personal information about our clients that is actually a material fact that we are required to disclose to the other side. I'm going to say that again. Normally, what would we do with our personal information we know about our clients, that confidential stuff? What would we normally do with it?
Keep it
confidential.
Guard it. Keep it confidential, right?
Yeah.
I represent the seller, and they're going and they are arguing with each other. Would I disclose that?
No.
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 Good job.
Absolutely not. I represent the buyer, and the buyer is having a really hard time psychologically. Would I disclose that?
No.
No.
It's confidential information of my client. I represent the buyer, and I know they're willing to pay $20,000 more than what they've offered. Would I disclose that?
Surely we would not.
No, absolutely not. It's their personal confidential information. So that's a pretty easy rule to follow, right? If your client tells you something, they're telling you in confidence. So what should you do with the information?
Keep it confidential.
Keep it confidential unless it directly relates to their ability to actually close this transaction.
Yeah.
For example, your buyer tells you, I just got a call from a lender. There's kind of a problem with my loan. Now, that may be very personal, confidential feeling to that buyer, but does it throw the transaction itself in doubt?
Yeah.
Yes.
And if it throws the transaction itself in doubt, folks, it just became a what?
Material fact.
Material fact that must be disclosed to your customers in the transaction. So if you're representing the buyer and the buyer tells you they got loan problems, who are you obligated to disclose that to now?
The
seller.
The seller, because they need to understand that the transaction is now in jeopardy.
Yep.
Your seller misses 3 payments. Is that the kind of thing you would disclose to a potential buyer, that they've missed payments?
No.
No, that's personal and confidential. That's their financial information. Everybody with me on that?
Yes.
The lender has begun the foreclosure process as a result of the missed payments.
Yes.
Yes,
Now we're
because
crossing
that
the line.
throws any transaction into doubt. Does that make sense for everybody?
If the buyer wants to make an offer on a $500,000 property, but they're only pre-approved for $300,000.
Ooh, look at that. The buyer has said to you, I want to offer $500,000 on this house. You have sat down with them, with the lender. They are your client, and they are pre-approved for $300,000, and there ain't no more.
Don't have any more cash.
But they want to offer $500,000.
Yeah.
Is that a material fact that you need to disclose to the seller? The buyer, so far as I know, is only qualified for $300,000. What do y'all think?
Yes.
Yes. Now here's the thing. Here's the interesting one about this, and I think this is where Seth's probably going to. Would you still submit the offer?
Yes.
Yes, because you have
Is
to
it legally
follow.
lawful?
Right. You have to follow the command of your client, and it's lawful to submit an offer, but you would submit it and say, "Here's their offer. To my knowledge, they're only qualified for $300,000."
Test question.
Because it becomes a material fact when it throws what into jeopardy?
The transaction.
Transaction.
The ability to close.
Basically, what we're saying here is when we represent people, and we find out there's reason to believe they can't actually close, we have to notify the other side, hey, I don't think my client can close. That help, Erica?
Yeah, had I known that about 10 minutes ago, I would have gotten it right.
There you go. There you go. Chris, what's up?
To this effect, like taxes, if someone's like behind on paying the property taxes, is that on the listing agent's responsibility, or is that not a material fact that would need to be listed when it comes to this deal?
So we're going to talk about this later in the class. Property taxes are a lien against the property. Property taxes are not technically owed by a person. They're owed by the property itself. So now that I've said that the property taxes are owed by the property, do you think unpaid property taxes would be a material fact that would need to be disclosed to any potential buyer? What do y'all think?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, because the property taxes are owed by the property that they are what?
Purchasing.
That they're purchasing. Therefore, they're still going to be owed by the property they're purchasing.
Even when they own it, right, Travis?
That's right. I mean, because the taxes are not owed by the seller. They're not owed by a person. They're owed by the land. And so if you buy the land, the taxes are still owed by the land. So absolutely, unpaid property taxes would be a material fact. Because that buyer needs to know that land comes with debt attached to it.
I have one question about that, about this, because this jogs my memory of a best friend buying a home who was told that the couple was divorced. Are you saying she could have been told? Well, she could have been told that because could have affected the income of the sellers, or she just was told that unlawfully.
No, if she was told that they were they divorced, or were they going through divorce?
It was a nasty situation.
That's why they were told it. Because think about a nasty divorce. What could either one of them have done at any point in time if they're in the middle of a nasty divorce?
Took money or left or anything. Yeah.
Not closed.
Oh yeah, not agreed.
Not closed.
Okay.
Somebody could have got their ass twisted up and said, I ain't closing. Fuck you. That's what people do. And as a real estate agent, you got to realize we're going to be in the middle of that situation. And if you're the listing agent and you feel like the sellers are at each other's throats so much that one of them just to screw the other is not going to close, that just became a what? Material fact, because you got to remember there's somebody else on the other side of that transaction who's spending money in good faith thinking they're going to have a what? A closing.
Property, yep.
And it's not fair to them. Does that make sense? Right? Now, if the fact that they're going through a divorce, but from everything you can tell, that's not going to affect the closing. They appear to be working together. Because I've represented people who were going through a divorce and they didn't want me to disclose that they were going through a divorce, but they were also meeting with me, working together. I had no reason to believe that was going to upset the apple cart. Do I need to disclose it?
No.
No. But if you got one threatening the other, if you don't give me this alimony, I ain't selling the house. Now do we have a material fact that needs to be disclosed?
Yes, we do.
Yes, because it could stop the transaction. Does that make sense for everybody why that's different?
Yes.
Yeah. It's only when it could stop the transaction. I've had people say, so if somebody can't qualify for a loan, you have to disclose that. Well, not necessarily. Do they have what available to pay for the property?
Cash.
Cash. If my buyer client can't get a loan, but they have cash and they're willing to pay cash, I don't have anything I need to disclose. That makes sense for everybody? Because they can still close. But if they don't have the cash and they can't get a loan, I definitely got a material fact. Okay. Are we all good with that?
Yes.
All right. So take a look at this question right here. And I know we're running up on lunch break, but we're almost to the point of it here. It says, a real estate agent who's representing a seller in a transaction notices a water stain on the ceiling. What is the best course of action for the broker? Okay. What is the best course of action for the broker? Let me activate it so you can answer it. A, disclose in writing to potential buyers that the home may have a water issue based on the stain. B, ask their client, the seller, if they should disclose the stain to potential buyers. C, adjust the answers on the seller's disclosure statement to reflect the water issue. Or D, verbally disclose the potential issues to buyers who are interested. Looks like most of you like A lot. So let's talk through them.
D.
A, disclose in writing. Well, I like that part right away. Because all disclosures must be made what, folks?
Writing.
In writing. We're not saying you can't disclose it verbally. We're just saying the rule was never going to test you on verbally.
Right.
The rule says you got to put it in what?
Writing.
Writing. Disclose in writing to potential buyers that the home may have a water issue based on the stain. Well, that's all we know. Isn't that just the fact?
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
These are not our clients. It says a real estate agent who's representing the seller. So I'm not disclosing to my client. I'm disclosing to who? Customers. So give them just the facts. I like A. I'm not going to choose it yet. We'll make sure it's none of the others. B, ask their client, the seller, if they should disclose. Stop right there. Do we ever ask our client if we should disclose something?
No.
No. It's not our client's decision when it comes to material facts. Does that make sense for everybody? Okay. C, adjust the answers on the seller's disclosure statement. No.
Negatory.
That's their form. That is not my circus, and these are not my monkeys, right? Just that's their deal, right? And then D, verbally disclose the potential issue to buyers. Well, you might do that, but that's not enough because all disclosures to satisfy the rule have to be made in what?
Writing.
In writing.
Customers may have the amnesia, forget about it.
Well, that's exactly right. They may forget it. It's got to be documented in writing that you've done this disclosure. It's perfectly fine to point it out verbally and say, I don't want you to say, oh, you're breaking the rule by doing it verbally. It's perfectly fine to say, hey, I just want to point out this water stain here. But then when you're done with them, send them an email, send them a text message. Hey, just as a reminder, there's the water stain on the ceiling in the hallway so that you've done it in writing.
Yes.
Okay. To satisfy the rule. Because the test is always going to test you again on the rule, not on the practical approach to things, but on the rule. How are we feeling so far about these material facts? It's a tough topic. It is a tough topic.
It's a tough topic, but it's a good topic.
It is. I love this topic because to me, this sets you up to be a good agent.
Absolutely.
When you start to understand this, you start to get really set up in a good way to protect the public's interest, which is ultimately what the goal is of the real estate commission, to protect the public.
And when you look at it from that perspective that you are protecting the public's interest instead of, oh, that's a material fact, you need to disclose it.
Right.
We ain't supposed to be doing all that. We're just supposed to look out for everybody.
That's it. I mean, and the answer, and then the root of it is, who am I disclosing to? Am I disclosing to my client or am I disclosing to my customer? If I'm disclosing to my client, I don't need to go any further. The answer is yes, disclose, whatever it is, right? But if I'm disclosing to a customer, I have to stop and say, only if it's a what?
Material.
Only if it's a material fact. If I'm talking to a customer, if I'm emailing with a customer, if I'm sharing with a customer, they get just the facts. And if it doesn't rise to the level of a material fact, don't disclose it.
Right.
But if I'm disclosing to a client, absolutely disclose it. Even material fact or not, disclose it. Because clients get what do they get?
Everything.
Everything. How many of you feel like you're going to have to really challenge yourself on the test when they ask you about should you share this information, to stop for a second and go, okay, is this a client or is this a customer? How many of you feel like that's going to be the key to answering the question?
Yeah.
It is the absolute key.
I'm gonna take a lot of breaks and not breaks, but I'm gonna really look at the question and stop and think.
You have to, absolutely. And you have to pause yourself and say, okay, they're asking me a question about disclosure. So let me read it and make sure I understand. Is this a client or is this a customer?
Right.
Because that's going to dictate your answer.
When I took my course exam, it was on paper, but my licensing exam was on the computer. So I didn't get any more benefit than you guys are going to get, but I literally had my pen under every word as I was reading it on my paper.
Absolutely. And let me tell you, that's where your whiteboard comes in really handy, because here's what you're going to do with your whiteboard. I think people think, okay, I only have the whiteboard for, math. Here's what you're going to do. You're going to sit there and you're going to go, okay, disclosure, and you're just going to write down disclosure. And then you're going to read through and you're going to go, okay, that's a client.
Yep.
And now when you start looking at the answers, you've got disclosure to client. So you know you're looking for the answer that says do what?
Oh, everything.
Disclose everything. Tell them, right? Because that will help you so much. Because these are long situational questions. But really, you got to get down to the facts that matter to you. They're asking me about disclosure. I'm doing it to a client. Okay.
Right.
Disclose.
And I wrote down A, B, C, D, and I would cross out the ones I was not dealing with. So that way I would be just between B and D.
Yep. Chris asked a great question. I saw Seth answered it, but it's worth repeating. It says, when reading questions, if it states representing, do we assume that they're a client? It's not an assumption. We only use the word representation when we're talking about clients, right? When we say we have an agency agreement with this person, when we say they've signed a listing agreement, or they've signed a buyer agency agreement, or they've hired us, all of those make them our what?
Client.
Our client. We don't sign agreements with customers, folks. We don't have agreements with our customers. We have agreements with who?
Clients.
Our clients. Our clients. Now, that doesn't mean a customer may not sign any agreement. They may have an agreement with the buyer. They may have an agreement with the seller. That's separate, but they don't have an agreement with us. If I'm the listing broker, am I ever going to come to an agreement with the buyer? Me, my office with the buyer, if I'm the listing broker?
No.
No. Who am I going to have an agreement with?
The seller.
The seller.
Seller, because that's my client. Does everybody see the difference?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yep. Okay. All right. Why don't we take a lunch break? What do y'all think about that? Okay. We're before the lunch break. Oh, they can't unmute. That's why.
I was like, that's why they're all quiet.
That's why they're so quiet. Okay, now you can. I fixed it. Thank you, Janet. So before we took the lunch break, we were talking about this idea of brokers disclosing information to customers. And what did we say the name was for those categories of information that are so special that the Real Estate Commission says we have to disclose them not only to our clients, but to customers?
Material facts.
Material facts. Yeah, exactly. Now, based on our discussion earlier, it's probably not hard to understand, and we looked at some disciplinary actions. It's probably not understand that it's at least somewhat common for brokers to screw this up. And that's one of the things that I can assure you the Real Estate Commission will test you on in a licensing exam.
Yes.
Is what violation is someone guilty of if they have incorrectly disclosed material facts? Because there's actually two categories that we can place that violation into. We can place a bad job of disclosing material facts as either one of two things. One happens when the licensee in question gives bad information. I'm going to say that again. If the licensee gives bad information, they are guilty of a misrepresentation of material fact. A misrepresentation is essentially a lie. Now, it can be an intentional lie or an unintentional lie. The Real Estate Commission still considers it a lie,
right?
Because incorrect information was given to the customer.
Right.
So, that happens anytime. Whether it's meant or not, a broker, a licensee in North Carolina, gives some customer of theirs wrong information. That's called a misrepresentation. An omission of material fact happens when the licensee should have given the information, but failed to do so. And that could be for a number of reasons. Maybe they didn't even know.
Right.
You could still be guilty. I think, Seth, this is probably a big hang up that people have on the test is how can I be guilty of an omission if I didn't know? Well, remember, you're not held responsible for just things you know.
Right.
What did we say that you all were going to be held responsible for? Things you know, yeah, but also things you what?
You don't know
You
that
should
you
know.
That's
Things you
it.
didn't know, but you should have, right?
Right.
Things that you should have known. And
Because
so,
otherwise, we would literally just be like, "Don't tell us. We don't know. We can't say anything because we don't know about it."
that is correct. So, failing to say, just not disclosing information at all when you should disclose the information is an omission of material fact.
Right.
Giving incorrect information, and again, whether you know the information is incorrect or whether you should have known the information was incorrect, is a misrepresentation. So when we looked at that earlier, and we looked at those disciplinary actions, one that I remember was the licensee failed to inform the buyer that the septic permit did not exist. They didn't say, here's the septic permit and give them the wrong one, but they just failed to inform the buyer of the issue with the septic permit not being in existence. Would you all say that's a misrepresentation of material fact, or would you say that is an omission of material fact?
That's an omission.
That's an omission of material fact. They didn't give wrong information. They just didn't give information that should have been relayed at all. Does that make sense for everybody?
Well, and just remember, guys, like we literally talked about what these things are all this morning up until right before lunch. Now we're just putting names to, well, what happens when they don't do it?
When the violation happens, exactly. We're naming the violation. Just like on Wednesday, we named the violations when it comes to mishandling money. If you had too much money in your trust account, we called that commingling, and you had not enough money, we called that conversion. Well, these are just the names of the violations. Like we need names for these violations. How about the one where the licensee gave the wrong square footage? They said the square footage was one thing, it turned out to be another. Would that be a misrepresentation or an omission?
Misrepresentation.
That would be a misrepresentation. Absolutely. Chris, did you have a question?
Yes. So we have went over like latent defects and stuff like that, ones that aren't in plain sight.
Yep.
What's the line here between omission and regarding the laws when it comes to those latent defects?
That is the line. You just said it. Latent means hidden. So you can't omit a latent defect because it's impossible for you to know about it. Remember, the line they're always going to be looking at is what reasonably should the licensee have known. If you don't, like for example, let's say the home has a leak somewhere in the roof line, but there's no signs within the home that there's a leak. Failing to say that is not an omission. Right. Because there's no reasonable way that the licensee would know that the leak exists. Does that make sense? It's only an omission when it's information that should have been known.
Yes.
And was not relayed.
Like for instance, too, like if there's something in the wall and it hasn't started showing external signs, like for instance, a wire it's burning, but the lights are working, the outlets are working, and then just God forbid the house catches on fire or something. I mean, how would you prove it? First of all,
how would you know that the problem was there? It's unfortunate, but the reality is we'll never know. What are we going to go in there and rip the sheetrock off of every wall in every house to see the potential issue? It's not possible.
No.
Not reasonable. Now, so here's an example of a misrepresentation. It says Tommy is a listing broker. So a listing broker, who's he working with?
Seller,
right? And states to a potential buyer that one of his listings has no problems with the roofing. Later, the buyer finds out that the roof is actually leaking. What makes this a misrepresentation, folks? What qualifies this as a misrepresentation?
No
He
problem.
gave false information.
You could bring it down to one word.
Later.
He stated, right?
Oh.
He gave information, didn't he?
Yes.
That takes away an omission, right? When you give information, there's no way you omitted it. Because once you gave it, you either gave it correctly or you gave it incorrectly. If you gave it correctly, you're not guilty of anything. If you gave it incorrectly, you're guilty of a misrepresentation. Does everybody see that?
Yes.
So in this case, he gave information. That information turns out to be wrong. That's a misrepresentation. Are we all okay with that?
Yes.
Okay. Now, an omission is harder to spot and harder to know about because omissions often involve things that brokers don't even realize they're doing wrong. Look at this one. It says Samara is a provisional broker. Remember, provisional broker means one with training wheels on. They have to be operating under somebody's direct supervision, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Samara's a provisional broker who takes her first ever listing. She tours the property with the seller, but is a bit too nervous to ask the seller about the obvious cracks in the foundation wall. Stop right there for just a second. If you're the listing broker and you're going to be putting this thing on the market and you notice obvious cracks in the foundation wall, is it time to be too nervous to ask the seller, or is it time to figure out what the heck is going on here so you can disclose these material facts? Better figure something out, right? But she's too nervous to ask because she's new. It says a buyer who did not have a home inspection, which by the way is fluff, we don't care about. I mean, that's for the buyer, not for us.
That doesn't relieve us.
Right? A buyer who did not have a home inspection purchases the property and later finds foundation settlement issues. This is an example of an omission because here's what the real estate commission is going to say. The buyer should have been aware that this was the potential for a problem because the listing broker at minimum should have said, you know, I've noticed cracks in the foundation. I'm not sure what that means, but if you want to check it out, there are cracks in the foundation. Does that make sense for everybody?
Right. We don't even recommend them get an inspection.
No, because we're talking
if you want to check it out, fair game.
We're talking to a customer. Now, if we were a buyer's agent, we would probably recommend, hey, I think you should have an inspection because that's who we give advice to, right? To our clients. But as a listing broker who's talking to a customer, a buyer customer, I would just point the fact out. But she didn't point the fact out. So what do we call it when you just leave out important information? You leave a material fact out. That's an omission. That's an omission. So let's take a look at a couple of these. And this is where, folks, I want you to be more in the process of elimination than anything else. I don't want you to necessarily look for a right answer. That's going to be a big test-taking strategy to learn early on. I want you to look for answers that we can eliminate. It says, Josie is a licensed salesperson who's taking a listing and walks through the property making note of all issues for disclosure purposes. Sounds like they're doing the right thing so far, right? Okay.
Yes.
Josie does not notice any sign of electrical issues, even though there are some spots of melted plastic on receptacle covers. So they just don't notice them. They're there, but they don't notice them. Months later, after a buyer closes on the property, the buyer discovers that the electrical wiring of several circuits is overloaded. What would be the best way to describe this issue from Josie's perspective? Here's what I want to ask you. Did Josie give information at all relating to this issue? Did Josie give any information? No. So what can we eliminate as possible answer choices here? Anything that has the word what in it?
Misrepresentation.
Misrepresentation. Does everybody see that this is not a misrepresentation?
Right.
Yes.
Right? So you're already down to a 50-50 chance of being able to answer the question correctly.
Right. And I really want to emphasize, and I am so proud of you guys who are getting it, but I want to emphasize the importance of going through it like this because it's not always going to be as straightforward as it might seem.
It's not always straightforward. So now we know it's an omission. The question is there more than one answer that gives us that, or are we done? What do y'all think?
More than one answer.
Disclosure? We're done.
It looks like we're done to me, doesn't it you?
Nope.
Oh, we're not?
No.
I say yes. I was following you
Yes.
at first,
Yes,
but
we
now
are.
I looked at the answer and now I'm like,
Well, look at the two answers we have left. Do we think this is a proper disclosure?
No.
So what can we do with that answer?
Cancel it out.
eliminate it.
Folks, what's the answer?
Neglect.
Negligent omission. You
Now,
don't
technically-
need to know why it's negligent.
Right.
And on the test, you won't need to know why it's negligent. You need to trust the process of elimination. You know it's not proper disclosure. You know they screwed up, right?
Right.
So we
That's
can
the-
eliminate that. You know it's not a misrepresentation.
That's the beauty of these test taking strategies. I think, Travis, you'll probably say this at some point, but I'm going to say it now. You are not looking for the right answer.
No, you're looking for wrong answers to get rid of.
Eliminate.
Yep, for sure. For sure. Eric, you had your hand up. Eric, did you have a question? I see your hand up. Well, I think he froze.
I'm going to ask you to unmute.
He's either very stoic or he's frozen.
Yeah, we go. You got it? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, cool. All right. I have a question. I agree with, obviously, I agree with this. And I thought 3 as well. But then I look back and I read the last sentence. It said, what would be the best way to describe this issue from Josie's perspective? And I got caught a little bit on Josie's perspective because her perspective might have been, I did this correctly, which kind of got me a little stuck on number 4, because from the commission side of things and from the rules and laws.
When they say from her perspective, they mean her actions. They're not. Nobody. Let's be clear. Nobody cares what she feels. Like she can get all up in her feelings, and nobody care about that. You know.
Right.
And yeah, we get where you're coming from.
I hear you.
Cool. That's clear. Thank you.
Yeah. And so I think what you have to recognize is because no information was given, we can eliminate the misrepresentation choices. We can eliminate proper disclosure because we see a mistake was made. We're left with negligent omission. Now, I could sit here and define negligent omission and give you the details of negligent omission, but here's the beautiful thing. You don't need to know what the difference is between a negligent omission and willful omission because they're not both on there. Does that make sense for everybody?
Yes.
Okay?
Yeah.
And that'll be true on the test. Look at this one. It says, William just purchased a home in Raleigh that was listed by Zach of Capital Properties, LLC. Capital Properties, LLC. Is that a broker or a firm? Firm. Good. Zach's MLS listing mentions that the property is serviced by city water and sewer, even though Zach has discussed with the seller that there's a well on the property which provides drinking water. So wait a minute now. Let me go back and read that again. So Zach listed this thing. In the listing, he says that the property is serviced by city water and sewer. But when he talked with the seller tells him, they discussed, that the water actually doesn't come from the city. It comes from a what?
Well.
It comes from a well. Has Zach given information here? Yes. Even though he's not talking directly to a human, isn't the purpose of the multiple listing service, the MLS, isn't that a way of communicating information?
Yes.
Right? So he's given information. Here's my question. Was that information accurate or was it not accurate?
Not accurate.
Okay.
Good job, boys.
So if he gave information and it's not accurate, what do we know we can eliminate here as far as answer choices? Eliminate the omission. Does everybody see that 3 and 4 can go away right away there?
Yes.
Because he gave wrong information. Now you got a 50-50 chance of getting it right. And then it says, okay, is this improper listing research or is this willful misrepresentation? Well, it sounds to me like he did the research correctly. He checked, he talked to the seller.
He had the knowledge.
He had the knowledge. He just didn't what?
Verify?
He just didn't disclose it correctly. Does that make sense for everybody?
Yes.
So what do y'all think this one is?
Number 2.
This is a willful misrepresentation. Very good. How many of you feel like you could answer that on the test by using that kind of process?
Yes.
Good. Because that's a commonly missed type question right there. It's a very commonly missed question. So I think you ought to be okay if you use that process. Eric, did you have another question or was that from before? We can put your hand down if that's from before. Okay. All right. Gotcha. Now, one terminology that you may see on the test, one terminology that you may see on the test, which can easily throw people off because they have not seen it before. And so I just want to make sure you are comfortable with it, is something called puffing. Now, listen, I know Not, no, no, not that kind of fun. Puffing of the variety we're going to talk about is actually very legal in North Carolina. Let's be clear. That kind of puffing, not legal in North Carolina.
Yeah.
The puffing that we are discussing is legal in North Carolina.
Right.
Puffing is basically
Very
marketing.
different.
It's marketing. Puffing is all the stuff we do to make something sound great when we're marketing, you know?
And when you do it correctly, it's very different from a misrepresentation.
Correct. Because in puffing, you're not actually giving any real information. You're giving only opinion. Opinions can't be misrepresented. Does that make sense for everybody? So puffing is somebody's opinion. This is the most beautiful lot in Cary. Well, different people are going to view it differently, right? That's just a complete what?
Opinion.
It's an opinion.
It's what are you basing that off of?
That's puffing, right? This is the most gorgeous floor plan in all of Prestonwood. That's
well, what did you use to judge that?
Right, that's puffing. Maybe somebody else hates it.
Right.
Now, here's the thing. There is a fine line between puffing and misrepresentation. This is the largest lot in Cary. See, that's not an opinion, right? Does everybody see the difference? Because that one can be verified.
Right. That way we can get out there and do something about it.
That's it. So puffing is just the act of using sort of flowery language to express an opinion about something. Everybody okay with that? Okay, good. So just make sure you're familiar with that terminology.
Can we use like a potential lot for vacation house or potential sort of?
Well, that depends. Is that accurate? Because remember what it can potentially be used for. And we haven't really talked about like controls of land use and that sort of thing. But remember, if the property's not zoned to allow for that, you would be misrepresenting by saying it's a potential. Like, for example, if I put a sign in front of my house that said potential location for sheets, that would be a misrepresentation. Because my lot is zoned only for residential use, it's not a great potential location. It doesn't matter that it would be busy as all get out. What matters is you couldn't do it here, right? And so that's why you got to be really careful about the fine line between puffing and a potential misrepresentation. So just make sure you understand. Puffing is fine. You just don't get carried away with it because it can easily turn into misrepresentation if you're not careful. Okay. And puffing's kind of an expected part of the business. I mean, think about how we market stuff. It's always, beautiful hardwood floors and gorgeous floor plan and, fantastic backyard. That's all puffing. That's what it is. Very subjective. Exactly, Jessica. Exactly. And so there are a few things, and this brings us wrapping up this section. There are a few things that the Real Estate Commission has declared as being not material facts. Let me be clear. What do we disclose to customers in our line of work? Only what?
Material facts.
Material facts.
Just a fact.
Because we only owe disclosure beyond material facts to who?
Clients.
Our clients. Now, let me be clear about that because I've had people get themselves in trouble with this. I am not saying, for example, because I want you to look on this list, somebody died in the property. I am not saying you never, ever need to disclose that somebody died in the property. I'm saying it's not a material fact. So who would you not be required to disclose it to?
Customers.
Customers. But who is owed everything when it comes to disclosure?
Clients.
So if you had a buyer client that you were showing property and you knew that the seller had committed suicide in the property, would that be something you would tell your buyer client?
Yes.
Yes, absolutely. Because you owe your buyer client what?
Everything.
Everything. But if you're the listing broker and you were hired by the sister of the seller who killed themselves in the house to sell the property, would you tell buyers at the open house that the seller had killed themselves in there?
Nope.
No.
I realize it's a very dark topic, but do you see how the same issue you would change whether you would disclose it or not based on who you're talking to?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So these items, it's not that they are never disclosed, it's that they're not disclosed in every situation because they're not material facts. Stigmatized properties, you know, somebody was sick in the property, somebody died in the property, somebody supposedly the property's haunted. Those are all examples of what we call properties that are stigmatized. Now, that's important to tell your clients,
Right.
but not required that you relay that information to customers. Now, Kayla in the chat mentioned, specific sicknesses like HIV or AIDS. We're actually going to talk about that a little bit more in detail when we get to things you can't talk about at all. If somebody has a disability, you can't talk about it even to your clients. And certain illnesses, particularly like HIV and AIDS, have been declared to be a disability. So even that, you can't even tell your clients if somebody was in the property with those, but we will talk more in detail about that. These are things that could be disclosed to clients, but not to customers. Now, I've had somebody say, so I could never tell a customer that somebody died in the property. Sure you could. If you got permission from who?
Client.
From your client.
Okay,
Client is
I think
boss.
she needs to be recognized for this one because I think it's very fitting for the time of year. She said, Jessica Molina private messaged me. She said, I was going to say the property is to die for, but it would probably be too dark for class.
That's not too dark for this class. Not at all.
Okay,
I'm in good company then. All right, cool.
I mean, honestly, if you have a listing around this time of year, especially October, I'd probably capitalize on that.
Let me just take this opportunity to tell you folks, you're going to see some stuff in this business. And a lot of it's going to be funny. And a lot of it's going to be interesting, but some of it's going to be things you wish you could take back and have never seen again. Because when you go into homes, things happen. You're going to have a little bit of a dark sense of humor to get through the day sometimes. I just tell you, because you're going to see some things that are going to be shocking in good ways and bad ways. It's just part of the deal. It really is, especially if you go into residential real estate.
So also, I do have somebody who messaged me privately here in the chat. It says, what if it involved someone with AIDS or HIV and they were killed in the home, potential hazard? Now, first of all, where in our right minds are we coming up with these scenarios, y'all?
Y'all are in some rough areas.
Y'all are crazy. But I get it. It's a legit question. But I mean, it ain't, no, it's
not a material fact. It's just not a material fact. You know,
we're not going to get into the biology, but
so I'll give you an example of that sort of in real world scenario. Like recently in Durham, a very infamous house sold. Any of you ever watched The Staircase, which is a crime docudrama on Netflix?
Yes.
So there is a house in Durham that the house was literally the murder weapon. The man killed his wife with the house. He basically used the stairs to beat her to death.
He looked like a sad.
I mean, not only did she die in the house, I mean, he literally, there was blood splattered from one end of that staircase to the other on the ceiling. It was gruesome.
Right. And I mean, it's like a nice
eyebrows of his.
And it is a
mansion.
mansion.
Like in a nice part of town.
It's a multi-million-dollar home, and I mean,
2001.
Not only was it the subject. I mean, this guy ran for mayor of Durham. He's a published author. This was a very well-known case. The Staircase is the name of the show. Very nationally sort of salacious case when it happened, so much so that they made a miniseries about it. The house just sold last year.
Like $1 million?
No, almost two. Almost two. Almost two. The buyers came from out of state, and had it not been in the local newspaper that the house from that story was for sale, and they just happened to pick up a newspaper, they would not have known what house they were buying, because the listing broker was not about to tell people, hey, by the way, somebody killed their wife in here. Because they're not obligated to. It's not a what?
Material fact.
Not a material fact.
So Emmy has the dark humor like on point. She said, did she pick the wrong color of the walls or what?
Yeah, it was a very famous case. I don't know what all happened there, but it was definitely very.
He looked like a sad man.
Here is another one, and no humor at all in this.
No,
but serious, real talk here, folks. This is where you're going to have a conflict, some of you internally. And I'm just going to tell you, you're going to have to put that internal conflict aside as a real estate licensee in this state. It is not a material fact in the state of North Carolina that a sex offender resides in or nearby a property. Now, here's why I bring that up. Number one, it's going to be tested. Number two, this is going to present a moral dilemma for some of you, potentially. I just want you to think about it. And this is why I say, when you're going to see some things in this business, what if you are listing a property for sale and you know your sellers are selling because the next door neighbor molested their children?
Oh, God.
Oh, my God.
It's tough. It's tough.
And you are holding an open house and the buyers bring their small children to the open house.
I would be like, look at the ugly color of this damn walls.
You need to be prepared to understand what your legal responsibilities are in that situation.
Right.
And your legal obligation is to your client, the seller, and not to those customers that are, as much as you may, as a human, have empathy for their situation and feel like, oh my gosh, they should know this. It's not your job, because they are your customer. And this is not a material fact, right? And so you would only disclose that if you had whose permission?
Seller.
Your client's permission, right? Your client's permission. And I highly doubt they're going to give it, because they know that it would seriously limit the marketability of their property.
Right. And so I want to refer back to a question that Morgan actually had asked. And Morgan, it's a great question. I just always like to remind y'all know some of this stuff. But one of the things that she had asked, I'm sorry, it says, it's right here. It's right here.
Right where?
I'm trying to find it. It says,
I don't even remember.
It was like on the lines of like, what if you, I'm so sorry, y'all. It was Alexia. If directly asked by customers, I'm sorry, it was Alexia. Do you have to tell murder, suicide, or death? Well, if you have your client's permission, but then if you don't have your client's permission and you get asked, you can't lie. You would need to be like, I'm
not at liberty to disclose. I'm not at liberty to discuss that, because it's not a material fact. A customer cannot force you into, and listen, folks, do not go down the rabbit holes with this stuff. We don't care if it's public knowledge. We don't care if it's public record. That is not our concern. And I get it. I know you want it like it lights your brain up. You try to think about, but here's the thing. All we care about is license law in this class. And from the perspective of license law, it's not a material fact, which means customers don't get that information unless our client has specifically given us permission to disclose that information.
And if you don't have a client, just shut up.
That's it. Vicky, did you have a question, or your hand went down? You good now?
Actually, you just answered my question. I was going to ask about, like, maybe it's kind of like piggybacking off of like the sex offender rule. Like, is it a material fact if maybe like there was like a criminal in the house, or like just like a general criminal? But I think you just answered that question.
No, absolutely not. That goes under the stigmatized property thing. It's a great question.
Yeah.
None of that is material fact. None of that.
Okay.
Again, we might think it should be. And by the way, in some states, it is a material fact that somebody died in the property or that there's a sex offender nearby, but North Carolina's not one of them.
Okay. Thank you.
We're a little crazy over here.
Rebecca?
Okay, sorry, I had trouble unmuting. My question is just because when we went over material facts, we specifically talked about like the train track being across the street and how that can lower the value, or if something's coming, it can increase the value. So how are like things that are in proximity, like train tracks or a Sheetz gas station, that affect the value? But then right here, the third bullet point says, since the presence of a registered sex offender living nearby can negatively affect property value, how does one constitute as material fact?
You're asking the wrong question. You're asking the wrong person. You need to ask the real estate commission, because why do we specifically call these out? Because they don't fit the rule.
Okay, so they just like explicitly eliminate like these.
That's exactly right. These are the ones that, can we all agree that if we followed the basic pattern of what was a material fact, that all of these things would be considered material facts, because they definitely impact the usability of the property and the potential value of the property? Can we agree that Lester the molester living next door would be a material fact based on everything we know about material facts up to this point?
Yeah.
Yes.
And that's why, Rebecca, I love your question, because what we're doing here is saying, we know these fit that pattern, but they have been explicitly declared not a material fact. That's why you just got to memorize these.
Right.
This little batch of things is not material facts, even though it seems like they should be, they're not.
Right. The thoughts you
Definitely
have are
this
the
seems
same
more
ones we
important
know.
than the train tracks, that's for sure.
Well, right. And
I mean-
I don't know why they came to the decision they did years ago when they decided these specific things were not going to be material facts, but that was their decision and we have to live with it.
Right. And
Until
Kylie,
they
to
change
answer your
it.
question, telling somebody that the information is public record is very different from identifying if somebody is or is not on the status as a positive or negative on the
Absolutely.
status.
And also, don't give advice to somebody that's your customer. Don't get cutesy. Stop trying to work your way around the rules. If they're your customer, you only give them what?
The material facts.
The material facts. That's it. You don't say to a customer, now, if I was you, I would check the sex offender registry. What is that I just gave them?
Advice.
And you only give that to who?
Your client.
Clients.
Wow.
You really do have to draw a very clear line in the sand for yourself and say, if they're my customer, I'm doing nothing but giving them material facts, and that's all.
Right.
Okay. Now, here's the thing, Natalie. Even if you have your client's permission, these are not material facts. Material facts are things that you disclose with or without your client's permission.
Right. It's like a stain on a car.
This is your client's personal and confidential information. And therefore, you only disclose your client's personal confidential information if they give their what? Permission. These things are not material facts, period. Which means you only disclose them with permission. Morgan?
Yes. It's not a question. It's just something that happened like this in my community on my street, actually. And my aunt, she isn't a real estate broker, but she studied real estate. So she knew this, and unknowingly, I didn't even know it was actually called the Megan's Law, but she told the neighbor that they could look it up to know, because they were living beside someone that had kids, and the guy, he ended up moving out of our community, but the people that he moved beside had no idea until they looked it up.
Yeah, right. And so I'm glad you mentioned Megan's Law, because that could show up on a national section of a test. The law that does make this publicly available is known as Megan's Law. Yes. Megan's Law is the federal law that basically requires sex offenders who have been convicted to register on a publicly available database. It is absolutely true that you can point some people to the sex offender registry. You can always point your clients there, because you're free to give your clients all the advice in the world. Does that make sense for everybody?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
You can point customers there if they ask about it. If somebody says, well, are there sex offenders nearby? You can say, well, I'm not at liberty to disclose that. And if they say, well, is there somewhere I can look it up? you can give them that answer and say, well, there is a registry and here's where you would find it. Does everybody recognize that's different than disclosing the presence of the sex offender? You're simply answering their questions. That's also different than disclosing a material fact, because a material fact, you don't wait for somebody to ask.
Right. Now, Travis, I think you're also, correct me if I'm wrong, you're not supposed to even say this to your client if they ask, or if the presence of a sex offender.
Yes, to your client, absolutely.
You do? Okay.
Absolutely. Remember, your clients are owed what information, folks?
That's right.
Everything. So here's the thing. If I knew there was a registered sex offender nearby, I would absolutely disclose that to my clients.
Okay.
You know? Now, I would want to be very careful and very accurate and verify that information with the sex offender registry and make sure that we were giving them accurate information. But they are owed everything we know.
Okay.
Our clients. Okay.
Thank you.
Yep.
I have a question for you both. Is that something that's maybe on your list of things that you look into when you're listing a home?
You know, I'll be honest and say it is not on my list of things that I look into when I'm listing a home, and I'll tell you why. Because it's not something I'm expected to disclose. You know, when I'm listing a home, I'm looking for two sets of things that help me market the property because that benefits my client, and things that I must disclose as a material fact. And this does not fit either of those two things. You know, this is not something that's going to help me market the property, help the seller. And this is not something that's going to be a material fact. So there's no reason for me to research it as a listing agent. Now, would there be a time when it would be more within my domain of responsibility to research this sort of thing?
Yes.
If you have buyers.
When I'm representing the buyer. When I'm representing the buyer, that's when this might fall more within my domain of say, hey, yeah, you need to check. If they really are interested in a property, this might be something to check. Make sure that they, are comfortable with that, because again, you owe your clients much greater duty than you owe to customers.
We will find out why later, but we are not going to sit here and say, well, only if your buyers have kids, because that is very against the law.
Well, right. You don't change what you do based on that. We're going to find out why later because of fair housing laws.
But just want to do it for everybody.
Yeah, exactly.
That's our plan.
Feeling pretty good?
Weird stuff.
Okay, good. Well, that wraps up, folks. Disclosure to